Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Tiffany Crawford. At 11 p.m. on May 2, 2017, 37-year-old Jason Crawford called 911. He reported that he was outside his home and that his wife, Tiffany, appeared lifeless in the car. When the ambulance arrived, they found a woman sitting in the driver's seat of her SUV. She slumped over and unresponsive. As they opened the door and checked for a pulse, a pink pistol fell to the floor of the car. Unfortunately, the woman could not be saved. The police discovered she had 2 gunshot wounds to her head, one on the left side of her jaw and another in her temple. Jason explained that he was at home during the incident. After an argument with his wife, Tiffany, he had forced her to leave the house. As she left, she told him she loved him. Shortly afterward, he heard a gunshot, her scream, and then another gunshot. He rushed outside, saw the tragic scene, and called for help. A police officer believed she ended her own life. But other officers had doubts and many questions. Tiffany was a very positive person and loved children very much. At the time of her death, she had 2 children, a son who was 5 years old and a daughter who was 4. She was a teacher and worked in that profession before having her children. At one point, she raised her children herself and understands the difficulties single mothers face. This led her to create a social media group called Mothers Helping Mothers. The group quickly gained popularity, amassing over 9,000 members who actively supported one another. The organization has become a place where people share experiences and receive support during difficult times. Tiffany had been married for over 6 years, and it was her second marriage. Her first marriage did not go well. Her second husband, Jason, had also been divorced for several years before they married. When Tiffany met Jason, she and her first husband were separated and in the process of divorcing. Tiffany and Jason began dating after her divorce was finalized. She was known for being cheerful and sociable. Those who knew her could not believe that she could end her own life. But she doesn't have any enemies either. After Tiffany's death, the police discovered that Jason was the son of a manager in the sheriff's department. Rhonda Crawford, his mother, informed Tiffany's mother about the incident. Due to Jason's connections to the police, the investigation was conducted very carefully to avoid a conflict of interest. Police suspect a violent death has occurred, so they need to thoroughly inspect the car where Tiffany was found. Consequently, the car was confiscated and inspected, and the area around it was scrutinized, but they didn't find any clues. An autopsy was needed to determine if Tiffany could have shot herself twice. The police continued their work at the scene after the medics departed. However, by morning, the sheriff decided to transfer the case to the Alabama Bureau of Investigation due to the conflict of interest. The new investigators needed to reconstruct the incident from the beginning and EED the SUV to find evidence. A warrant was obtained to search the vehicle, but when an officer went to the sheriff's office, they found out that the car had already been returned to Tiffany's family and Jason was using it. When an officer arrived at Jason's house, he found that the SUV had been thoroughly cleaned, and the interior was shining. Although less than 24 hours had passed since Tiffany's death, important evidence was lost. However, the lab was able to examine the car and take several photographs. For unknown reasons, the vehicle was returned to Jason, as if the possibility of murder was not considered. Despite these suspicious circumstances, the officers were interested in the conversation that occurred between him and Tiffany on that tragic night. Jason mentioned that Tiffany has become very distant from him in recent months. He noticed changes in her behavior, which he attributed to alcohol. According to Jason, she was consuming 2 or 3 bottles of strong alcohol each week and was involved with a support group for mothers. Meanwhile, their marriage was falling apart. At the same time, experts are analyzing the bullet's flight path and studying the possibility that Tiffany shot herself twice. The first shot struck the left side of her chin, and the second hit her left temple, with the weapon falling from her left hand. However, Tiffany was right-handed. It is very uncommon for police to encounter cases where a victim inflicts fatal injuries on themselves, especially using their non-dominant hand. This was the first time they had seen such a scenario. All the circumstances were very confusing, which made the investigation take a long time. Police accessed Jason and Tiffany's social media and computers. Then, they found several important messages. Just a few hours before the incident, Jason discovered Tiffany's messages with another man on the computer. This may make him angry, and maybe he killed her, making him a suspect. Then, Jason admitted he knew about the messages and was angry, leading to an argument. He met his wife at the door and refused to let her in. Their conversation lasted about an hour, during which she asked to collect her clothes. Jason slammed the door and went to gather her belongings. According to Jason, moments later, he heard a gunshot, a scream, and then another gunshot. After interviewing Tiffany's relatives and friends, the police discovered that her mother and friends knew about her extramarital affair. It was revealed that she intended to leave Jason because they often quarrel and have conflicts. They had been facing issues for a while, and it seemed that a divorce was imminent. Tiffany found a job at a grocery store, which allowed her to be financially independent and not dependent on her husband. She did not want her husband to find out about her new relationship to avoid hurting him. Long before the incident, she communicated with her mother over the phone, clarifying that she and the other man were just talking and nothing more. She planned to have a serious discussion with her husband, Jason, to talk over all the details of the divorce. Most of Tiffany's relatives and friends do not believe that she ending her own life. They knew that she would not be able to leave her young children behind. However, Jason already knew what had happened, and it involved he. Detectives listened back to the recording of Jason's call to 911, which he made after discovering Tiffany's body. The police noted that he was extremely calm, which was unusual given the circumstances. He didn't seem worried at all. Moreover, when the dispatcher repeatedly asked who had shot she, he didn't answer any of the questions. Was his silence due to remorse, as if he were the killer? A week after Tiffany's death, the results of the forensic examination were still pending. Nevertheless, the detective decided to question Jason. The officer inquired about the incidents of that evening, revealing new details that Jason had not previously mentioned. The detective suggested a lie detector test, which Jason agreed to take. During the test, he was asked directly if he had shot his wife. He denied shooting her, ended the interrogation, and left. The police did not detain him, but the lie detector test was automatically considered a failure. The forensic examination took longer than expected because of some contentious issues, and there wasn't enough evidence to charge Jason. However, there was enough reason to classify the case as a murder. No one believed that Tiffany had ended her own life. It took nearly a year for Jason to face a jury. For the relatives and friends of the Crawfords, this period was extremely difficult. No one could have imagined that Tiffany would end her own life, especially twice. However, Jason was such a wonderful person that it seemed impossible to suspect him of such a cold-blooded murder. During the year-long investigation, Tiffany's relatives continued to communicate and maintain relations with the Crawfords. Nevertheless, investigators had a different perspective, as the autopsy confirmed that Tiffany was murdered. The first wound paralyzed her, so it was impossible for her to fire a second shot. It appeared that the second shot was meant to finish her off. Jason was arrested on May 21, 2018, but was in custody for only half an hour, then, he being released on a $100,000 bail. Law enforcement officials noted that he appeared unworried, remaining confident and calm. The defense argued that no traces of gunfire or blood were found on Jason's clothes. However, the police did not conduct these tests because they initially believed Tiffany had ended her own life. The house was not searched. If searched, it might have revealed Jason's involvement in the case. Their eldest son hesitantly said he heard his father, Jason, enter the house before the first shot was fired. The prosecution argued for Jason's guilt, pointing to a failed lie detector test. However, the defense countered that lie detector tests are not 100% accurate and have a significant margin of error. Forensic experts and police remain convinced that he is guilty. His calm demeanor during the call to 911 was noted, but could not be considered evidence. He explained that he was in shock due to the traumatic sight, which was why he was calm. People react differently in such situations. Forensic experts have good reason to suspect Jason. A gunshot wound on the left side of Tiffany's head. There were no gunpowder particles or abrasions around the wound, which typically occur from the shock wave when a gun is fired at close range. These traces vanish at distances over 25 centimeters, making it nearly impossible for her to inflict the wound on herself without assistance, especially in the confined space of a car. Moreover, the trigger was pulled with the left hand while the car door was closed. Even if she had turned around in the car, there wouldn't have been enough space for such a movement. When detectives arrived at the scene that night, the driver's side door was closed. There was no blood or gunpowder on the glass, suggesting the door was open during the shooting. These inconsistencies imply that the killer was nearby when the incident occurred. The killer likely shot Tiffany with the door open, placed the gun in her hand, closed the car door, and the gun then fell from her hand. Despite this evidences, Tiffany's mother continued to support Jason. In an interview, she expressed that she still trusts him, emphasizing that he is a decent man. The first trial ended without a verdict because the jury could not agree on Jason's guilt. The reason is the lack of evidence such as fingerprints, DNA, or security camera footage. More than 4 years have passed since that tragic night. In the second trial, which included a new independent forensic expert, the expert supported the theory that Tiffany ending her own life. In November 2022, Jason appeared in court again, he facing charges of first-degree murder. He still had the support of Tiffany's mother, although she did not want to attend court to hear accusations she believed were false. Despite her reluctance, she was compelled to testify as the prosecution's first witness. The prosecution highlighted Jason's history of being wronged, noting that his first wife had cheated on him, severely damaging his honor, and that his second wife, Tiffany, was also in contact with another man. Police discovered a recording of a call Jason made the evening before the murder, indicating he was extremely upset. However, Jason claimed he did not remember this conversation. He also continued to have a friendly relationship with his first wife. Experts collected DNA to test the gun. They found a man's fingerprints on the gun. However, the fingerprints were too minimal to identify anyone, which raised further questions. It appeared the weapon had been wiped clean before it ended up in Tiffany's hand. The prosecutor stated that the main motive for the murder was anger over Tiffany's extramarital affair. The prosecution argued that the weapon was 25 centimeters from her head. However, an independent forensic expert countered these arguments. He explained that Tiffany's thick hair could have absorbed the impact and dispersed traces of gunpowder and blood. Therefore, the weapon might have been closer but didn't leave any clear traces. Friends provided key information, confirming that Tiffany had been drinking heavily. It was also revealed that she was seeing a psychologist before these incidents to address emotional issues. After 4 days, the case went to the grand jury. They deliberated for over 2 hours and then asked to see the recording of Jason's conversation with the 911 dispatcher. The jury noted that when Jason was asked where the pistol was, he said it was lying next to Tiffany, but the pistol was actually in his hand when the police and medics arrived. Based on this inconsistency, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Although Jason claimed he might have misspoken, but Tiffany's mother turned away from her once beloved son-in-law. Jason Crawford received a 99-year prison sentence but will be eligible for parole after 15 years. His expected release date is November 16, 2121, but he can apply for parole in 2038. Jason plans to appeal the verdict. The children of he and Tiffany currently live with Jason's parents. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Likens was born on January 3, 1949, in Lebanon, Indiana, to carnival workers Lester and Betty Likens. She was the third of 5 children, and her childhood was marked by frequent moves and financial hardship. Sylvia's siblings included 2 sets of twins, older twins Daniel and Diana, and younger twins Benny and Jenny. Jenny suffered from polio, which left her with a limp and weak legs, requiring her to wear a steel brace for support. Due to her parents' unstable marriage and nomadic lifestyle, Sylvia and Jenny often stayed with their grandmother, providing a safer and more stable environment. This arrangement allowed the girls to maintain a steady education despite the family's frequent travels. Sylvia began taking on responsibilities at a young age. She babysat, ran errands for neighbors and friends, and helped with household chores such as ironing. This allowed her to earn some money to buy things she wanted, and she often shared the money with her mother. Those who knew Sylvia described her as a friendly, confident, and charming girl with long, wavy, light brown hair that fell to her shoulders. Her friends affectionately called her Cookie. However, despite her outgoing personality, Sylvia was self-conscious about her smile because she had lost a front tooth due to a childhood accident while playing with one of her brothers. Sylvia often took Jenny to the local skating rink, where she would help her skate by holding her hand. In June 1965, Sylvia and Jenny lived with their parents in Indianapolis. However, their mother was arrested and jailed for theft in July. Their father, Lester, then arranged for his young daughters to stay with Gertrude Benizzi, a mother of 2 daughters, Paula and Stephanie, whom the Sylvia sisters had met at Arsenal Technical High School. Gertrude agreed to care for the girls as her own until Lester returned. After July 4th, Sylvia and Jenny moved into Gertrude's home at 3850 East New York Street. Meanwhile, their father, brother, and later their mother traveled to the East Coast for the festival. Gertrude would receive $20 a week to care for the sisters until November. At first, things seemed normal at Gertrude's house. Sylvia got along well with Stephanie, and they enjoyed activities such as singing along to pop songs and helping around the house. The Sylvia sisters regularly attended Sunday school with the other Benizzi children, and Sylvia was praised by the pastor for her kindness and respect. Problems arose, however, when Sylvia's father, Lester, began to pay Gertrude late, often a day or 2 after the due date. These delays frustrated Gertrude, leading her to abuse the sisters. She began to spank their bare bottoms with various objects, such as a 1/4-inch paddle, and cursed them. As the late payments became more frequent, the abuse and beatings escalated. On one occasion, Paula reported that Sylvia and her sisters had eaten too much at church dinner. As a result, both girls were spanked about 15 times on the back with the paddle. This occurred just a month after they moved in with Gertrude's family, in late August. Gertrude's behavior became increasingly abusive, with Sylvia as the primary target. It is possible that Gertrude's jealousy of Sylvia's youth and beauty contributed to her actions. Over time, the abuse became worse, with more frequent beatings. Sylvia was often starved. They were given only leftovers or spoiled food from the trash. On one occasion, she was falsely accused of stealing candy that she had actually bought. On another occasion, she was publicly humiliated when Sylvia told Stephanie and Jenny about a boyfriend she had in Long Beach, whom she had met while her family was living in California. She shared stories of her time with him, including one in which she snuggled under the covers with him. Gertrude asked Sylvia why she did that, and Sylvia shrugged and said she didn't know. A few days later, Gertrude brought up the subject again, this time making a sarcastic comment about Sylvia's growing belly and hinting that she might be pregnant. Sylvia thought Gertrude was joking and joked along. However, Gertrude continued to make things worse, repeatedly mentioning Sylvia's interactions with Son and hinting that she was pregnant. The situation turned violent when Gertrude suddenly kicked Sylvia in the genitals. Gertrude's overweight and pregnant daughter, Paula, who was jealous of Sylvia's appearance, joined in the attack. She pulled Sylvia out of the chair and onto the kitchen floor, screaming that Sylvia didn't deserve to sit in the chair. In another incident, while the family was having dinner, Gertrude, Paula, and a neighbor boy, Randy Gordon Lepper, forced Sylvia to eat a hot dog filled with mustard, ketchup, and relish. As expected, Sylvia vomited, and they brutally forced her to swallow what she had vomited. Sylvia was so upset that she spread rumors at school, accusing Stephanie and Paula of prostitution. When a boy at school approached Stephanie with offers, saying that Sylvia was the one who spread the rumors, Stephanie confronted Sylvia when she got home. Sylvia confessed to being the one who spread the rumors. Then, in retaliation, Stephanie punched her very hard. Sylvia apologized and cried. Stephanie's 15-year-old boyfriend, Randolph Hubbard, found out about the incident and the rumors, and then violently assaulted Sylvia. He slapped her, slammed her head against the wall, and threw her to the floor. Stephanie's mother, Gertrude, also joined in, hitting Sylvia several times with a paddle. Daily life at Gertrude's house was a nightmare of increasingly violent episodes. On one occasion, Paula punched Sylvia in the face so hard that she broke her own wrist, concentrating her blows on Sylvia's mouth and eyes. Paula then used a brace on her arm to beat Sylvia even harder. The abuse the Sylvia sisters suffered was not limited to physical violence. Gertrude also abused them verbally and psychologically. On one occasion, she falsely accused Sylvia of being a slut and a prostitute, criticizing the immorality of prostitution and the degradation of women. Gertrude then forced her younger sister Jenny to beat her, threatening that if she refused, she would suffer the same abuse as Sylvia. The Sylvia sisters were abused not only by Gertrude's family, but also by Coy Hubbard and his classmates, who frequently visited Gertrude's home. They would verbally and physically abuse Sylvia, and often with the participation of Gertrude and her children. Neighborhood children also frequently beat Sylvia, using her as a punching bag in violent judo training sessions. They would burn her body, burn her skin with sticks, and cause severe injuries to her genitals. In one particularly humiliating incident, Sylvia was forced to strip in the living room and masturbate with a bottle. Gertrude would later tell everyone that this humiliating act was to show Jenny what kind of person her sister was. Over time, Gertrude banned Sylvia from school after she confessed to stealing a gym outfit from school. Sylvia had taken the outfit because Gertrude had not bought her clothes. As a result, Sylvia's education was disrupted and she was severely punished. Gertrude regularly beat her with a 7-inch police belt. The situation escalated when Gertrude changed the subject to premarital sex and then kicked Sylvia in the genitals. During this attack, Stephanie defended Sylvia, shouting, "She didn't do anything." Gertrude continued to torture her by burning Sylvia's fingertips with matches before continuing to beat her. A few days later, Gertrude used a police belt to beat Jenny several times. Jenny is said to have taken a tennis shoe from school to put on her stronger foot. As the torture and abuse worsened, Sylvia was not allowed to use the bathroom and was forced to wet the bed as punishment for her incontinence. On October 6, 1965, Gertrude took Sylvia to the basement, tied her up, and barely fed or watered her. She was often tied to the basement stair railing with her feet barely touching the ground. Gertrude's family would occasionally stop abusing Sylvia to watch their favorite television show. Sylvia's tragic ordeal even involved the neighborhood children, who paid 5 cents each to participate in her humiliation, beating, burning, and eventually mutilation during her captivity in the basement. Gertrude and her children bound and gagged Sylvia, then placed her in a bathtub filled with hot water and rubbed salt into her wounds. After this incident, the father of a neighbor boy named Michael John Monroe anonymously called the Arsenal School to report that a girl with sores all over her body was living at Gertrude's house. A school nurse came to Gertrude's house to investigate, as Sylvia had been absent from school for several days. However, Gertrude lied to the nurse, saying that Sylvia had run away the previous week and that she did not know where she was. Gertrude attributed Sylvia's sores to poor personal hygiene. Gertrude also claimed that Sylvia had been a negative influence on both her children and her sister. The school did not investigate further, neglecting to check on Sylvia's health or whereabouts. In mid-October, Gertrude's son, John Banaszewski Jr., played a cruel prank on Sylvia. He offered her a plate of soup, but quickly snatched it away when she tried to eat it with her hands. By this time, Sylvia was severely malnourished. Gertrude allowed Sylvia to sleep upstairs that night, but only if she did not wet the bed. Before going to bed, Sylvia secretly asked Jenny for a glass of water. The next morning, Gertrude discovered that Sylvia had accidentally wet the bed. To punish Sylvia, Gertrude forced her to masturbate again with a glass jar in front of Gertrude's children. Immediately afterwards, Gertrude yelled at Sylvia to go back to the kitchen. She then ordered Sylvia to strip. Gertrude told Sylvia, "You branded my daughter, now I will brand you." Using a hot needle, Gertrude began carving the words, "I am a prostitute and proud of it," into Sylvia's stomach. While Gertrude was still carving, she told 14-year-old Richard Hobbs to finish carving the words into Sylvia's skin. Meanwhile, Gertrude took Jenny to a nearby grocery store. Richard continued carving the words into Sylvia's stomach as she gritted her teeth and groaned in pain. Later, Richard and 10-year-old Shirley took Sylvia into the basement. They tried to burn the letter "Des" under Sylvia's left breast with an anchor bolt. The resulting deep burn scar looked like the number 3. That terrible night, Sylvia confided in her younger sister Jenny, saying that she was sure she would die from the unbearable abuse. The next day, Gertrude forced Sylvia to write a letter, the contents to fool her parents into thinking that Sylvia had run away from Gertrude's house. The letter was intended to falsely accuse a group of local boys of mistreating and harming Sylvia, claiming that she had initially consented to sexual intercourse with them. After the letter was written, Gertrude planned to have John Jr. and Jenny blindfold Sylvia, take her to a nearby wooded area called Jimmy Woods, and leave her for dead. However, this plan was not immediately carried out. Instead, Sylvia was tied to the railing of the basement stairs. Gertrude offered her biscuits, but Sylvia refused, offering to give them to the dog. Angered, Gertrude stuffed the biscuits into Sylvia's mouth, and she and her son John began to beat Sylvia savagely, aiming for her stomach. On October 26th, Sylvia's condition worsened. She had difficulty speaking and could no longer move her limbs properly. Gertrude took her into the kitchen, pressed her against the wall, and tried to feed her a donut and a glass of milk, but Sylvia was unable to hold the glass of milk properly. Gertrude became frustrated and assaulted Sylvia. After being thrown to the floor and returned to the basement, Sylvia became delirious, moaning and mumbling continuously. When Paula asked her to recite the alphabet, Sylvia could not read past the first 4 letters, indicating that her cognitive abilities were severely impaired. She was also unable to get up from the floor. That afternoon, a group of neighborhood tormentors gathered in the basement, and Sylvia attempted to identify them, waving her arms and shouting names. However, her efforts were hampered by her increasingly deteriorating physical and mental condition. After being repeatedly abused, Sylvia attempted to escape from the basement but collapsed from exhaustion before reaching the stairs. As a result, she faced severe punishment. Gertrude hit Sylvia hard on the head, knocking her unconscious, then stood there watching her for a while. At 5:30 p.m., Richard Hobbs arrived at Gertrude's house and went straight to the basement. There, he found Stephanie crying, holding Sylvia's weak and badly injured body. Her mother Gertrude instructed Stephanie to clean Sylvia, but Stephanie and Richard decided instead to bathe Sylvia with warm soapy water and dress her in clean clothes. After bathing, they placed Sylvia on a mattress in one of the bedrooms. In her final moments, Sylvia expressed her final wishes to be with her father or at least taken home. After enduring severe punishment and weakened by lack of food, she eventually died from her injuries. When Stephanie discovered that Sylvia was no longer breathing, she attempted to revive her with artificial respiration. Meanwhile, Gertrude claimed that Sylvia had been faking her death. Initially, Gertrude beat Sylvia's body with a book. When Sylvia was found dead, Gertrude panicked and ordered Richard Hobbs to call the police from a nearby pay phone. When the police arrived at the address around 6:30 p.m., Gertrude led them to the bedroom, where they found Sylvia's badly beaten and mutilated body on a dirty mattress. Gertrude gave the police a letter that Sylvia had been forced to write. Gertrude claimed that she had cared for Sylvia for more than an hour before her death and had applied antiseptic to her wounds in an attempt to provide first aid. She told the police that Sylvia had run away with some teenagers earlier, but had returned that afternoon, topless and holding the note. Holding a Bible, Paula told everyone in the house that Sylvia's death was preordained. She then turned to Jenny and calmly said, "If you want to stay with us, we will treat you like one of our sisters." However, Jenny was urged to say something to the police before they arrived. Jenny recounted the events leading up to Sylvia's death at the request of Gertrude's family. Jenny then whispered to the police to take them away, and she told them everything. Jenny Lycan's official statement led to the arrest of Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr. Banaszewski on suspicion of Sylvia's murder, just hours after her body was discovered. Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs were also arrested and charged with the same crime on the same day. Gertrude and Coy Hubbard's 3 older children were taken to a nearby juvenile detention center, while Gertrude and Richard Hobbs' younger children were detained at the Indianapolis Children's Home. All were held without bail until trial. Initially, Gertrude denied any involvement in Sylvia Lycan's death. However, within a day of her arrest, she admitted to knowing the children and admitted that her daughter, Paula, and Coy Hubbard had physically and mentally abused Sylvia. Gertrude also admitted to forcing Sylvia to sleep in the basement 3 times after she wet the bed. When asked about possible causes of Sylvia's incontinence, including emotional distress and kidney injury, Gertrude was evasive. Paula showed no remorse and signed a statement admitting to repeatedly hitting Sylvia. She also admitted to other acts of cruelty, such as pushing Sylvia down the basement stairs multiple times. John Jr. admitted to hitting Sylvia and frequently abusing her with his fists. He also confessed to burning Sylvia with matches on multiple occasions and said that his mother had burned Sylvia with cigarettes on multiple occasions. Sylvia Lycan's autopsy revealed severe and widespread injuries, with over 150 separate wounds throughout her body. She was severely malnourished at the time of her death. The injuries varied in location, type, severity, and stage of healing, and included burns, severe bruising, and significant damage to muscles and nerves. In addition, her vaginal cavity was swollen and nearly closed, and the autopsy found that her hymen was intact, refuting Gertrude's claim that Sylvia was 3 months pregnant and the allegations of prostitution and promiscuity. Sylvia Lycan's official cause of death was severe head trauma resulting in bleeding into the brain. The cause was a blow to the right side of her head. The doctor also noted that Sylvia's body had suffered severe damage from prolonged abuse of her skin and underlying tissues, as well as prolonged malnutrition. Sylvia's body was found and it was estimated that she had likely died within 8 hours of her discovery. An autopsy revealed that Sylvia had been recently bathed, possibly after her death, which could have affected the rate of loss of body temperature and the onset of rigor mortis. Gertrude Banaszewski, her children Paula and John, and 2 young neighbors, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, were tried and convicted in May 1966 for the neglect, torture, and murder of Sylvia. After 8 hours of deliberations, the jury found Gertrude guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to life in prison. She was paroled in 1985. Paula was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. She later appealed and was retried in 1971, where she pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 2 to 21 years in prison. She was released from prison in 1972. Hobbs, Hubbard, and John were convicted of manslaughter and spent less than 2 years in the Indiana House of Reform before being paroled on February 27, 1968. Indiana residents consider the torture and murder of Sylvia Likens to be the worst crime in the state's history. Sylvia died on October 26 in Indianapolis, Indiana, before her parents could return to pick her and her sister up in November. The sisters did not want to report the increasing abuse and neglect to family members or school, fearing that speaking out would only make things worse. Jenny, the younger sister, was threatened by Gertrude that she would be abused and tortured like her sister if she spoke up. Jenny was also bullied by neighborhood girls, who would taunt or attack her whenever she mentioned her sister's plight. Neighbors, including a middle-aged couple who lived nearby, saw signs that the girls were being abused, but no one dared to report it to the police. All those involved in Sylvia's torture and murder were sentenced to prison. Although some perpetrators do not serve full prison sentences, they will forever be haunted by the consequences and horror of their actions. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Leslie Palacio. On the morning of the 29th, the family of Rosalia Palacio, a mother of 5 daughters, became concerned. Her eldest daughter, Kayla, noticed that Leslie's bed had been made, her belongings were missing, and it was clear that she had not spent the night at home. At first, one of the sisters joked that Leslie must have had a great time at the club and had probably slept over at Eric's house. However, everyone quickly became worried because Leslie had never done anything like this before. As they ate breakfast, Kayla kept checking her phone, expecting Leslie to text at any moment. But as time passed, there was still no news from Leslie. By noon, her mother Rosalia's anxiety grew. She decided to go to Eric's house to find out where her daughter Leslie was. When she arrived, she saw Eric's mother and sister moving furniture and other items out of the house. While this may have been a normal activity, the situation and Mrs. Ibra's tears made Rosalia feel uneasy. Something was wrong. When Rosalia asked about Leslie's whereabouts and why Eric's phone was not working, Eric's mother and sister insisted that they did not know Leslie had stayed with Eric the night before. Rosalia pressed them, asking if Leslie had stayed over, as her daughter had sent a text message saying she was going to Eric's house. When Eric's family denied this, Leslie's family began to realize that something was really wrong. Leslie's sister began searching for her by calling local hospitals and looking up accident reports from the past 24 hours online. However, she could not find any information about Leslie. The sister also tried to contact Eric, but his phone seemed to be turned off or had run out of battery, as it went straight to voicemail without ringing. Left with no other choice, Rosalia's mother decided to contact the police. On August 30th, the police officially listed Leslie as a missing person, marking the beginning of a long and intense battle for justice. Leslie Palacio was born on May 5, 1998, in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA. She lived a short but full life, filled with love and care for her family. Leslie was known to be friendly and outgoing, bringing joy to those around her. She appreciated everyone she met and was appreciated in return. Leslie aspired to pursue a career in medicine. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in Las Vegas College of Medicine in 2020 to become a phlebotomist. She worked part-time as a lab technician, combining theoretical knowledge with practical skills. As a student, Leslie showed exceptional talent. Her academic performance was impressive and she grasped new concepts easily, always striving to expand her knowledge. This motivation prompted her to take up a part-time job as a lab assistant. Her colleagues consider her not only a reliable and professional lab technician, but also a kind and compassionate person. Leslie's responsibilities include conducting a variety of analyses and tests, but for her, this job is more than just a job requirement. She sees her purpose as making the testing process as comfortable as possible for her patients. Her caring and patient nature creates an atmosphere of trust that puts even the most anxious patients at ease. Leslie's enthusiasm and energy are evident in everything she does. By all accounts, she had the potential to become a sought-after expert in the field of medical laboratory diagnostics. However, one big turning point changed everything. Leslie has been caring for others since she was a child. The second of 5 daughters, she often took on the role of mother when her mother, Rosalia Palacio, was exhausted from cleaning hotels. One evening, after Rosalia had cleaned more than 15 hotel rooms, Leslie gently told her to rest while she prepared dinner. Leslie found cooking enjoyable and took it upon herself to make sure her family was well fed. She continued to prioritize her family's health, even when she was away. She would call home to check in to see if everyone had eaten, showing that family was her top priority. Her energy and ideas inspired her sisters, and she easily became a role model for them. During the pandemic, Leslie found a way to stay active by hosting workouts in her backyard. She taught her mother various exercises and danced daily with her sister in front of the mirror to music. Leslie's creativity also extended to experimenting with hair color and image, which inspired a business plan with her sister to open a fashion boutique. Together, they designed and sewed dresses at home in their own unique styles. When the pandemic forced Rosalia out of work, Leslie suggested that her mother start a small cleaning company and offered to help with the cleaning in her spare time. "We'll be fine, Mom, you'll see," Leslie reassured Rosalia. The family brainstormed a name for the company, settling on Palacio Cleaning Services. The family business had landed its first contract, but everything changed on August 29, 2020. Leslie had just finished her lab assistant program and the company received a large order. Feeling relieved, she decided to take a break and enjoy a night of dancing and fun. This was especially welcome as Las Vegas slowly began to return to normal after the pandemic restrictions were lifted. Leslie's friends didn't want to hang out with her, even though things were slowly returning to normal after a period of fear and anxiety due to the pandemic. People still felt uncomfortable being in crowded, enclosed spaces. Leslie didn't give up and posted on Instagram about wanting to go out for the evening. She was surprised to see Eric Rangel Ibra texting her. Their parents had attended the same church for 14 years, so Leslie and Eric had known each other since they were kids, but had never really interacted. Leslie knew about Eric's interests, and although he would text her and show interest, she only responded out of politeness. However, on this special day, Leslie made an exception to her usual routine and accepted Eric's invitation to spend time together. She wanted to add a little excitement to her usual life with a fun night out. After a long day of anticipation and no friends to join her, Leslie decided that sharing a fun night out with Eric was better than staying home. She wanted to have an exciting adventure, but had no idea that a series of terrible events were waiting for her. Although she tried to reassure herself that there was no reason to worry. Anyway, Leslie agreed with her sister that she would send her sister regular messages, telling her exactly where she was. She also told Kayla in great detail where she was going, with whom, and where she could go. After a while, the sister received a strange text message. "Can you believe Eric is completely sober tonight? We're at a party, but it looks like I'm going to have to party alone." The sisters then exchanged joking text messages about other topics. Eric and Leslie's first destination was the Longhorn Hotel Casino. Surveillance footage later reviewed by police showed the couple arriving in Eric's white Ford F-250 at 12:31 a.m. on August 29. They entered the casino and left shortly thereafter at 1:56 a.m. Leslie continued to communicate with her sister, updating her on their activities. At 4:40 a.m., Leslie sent her sister another strange text message. "I need to talk to you about something bad." Kayla asked what happened and, according to her, a text box popped up as if Leslie had started to reply, but there was no reply. That text message was Leslie's last. On the morning of the 29th, Leslie still had not returned home. As time passed, the Leslie's worries grew. Their initial certainty that Leslie had spent the night at Eric's house was replaced by confusion. The family decided to go to Eric's house, where they discovered a puzzling scene. Mrs. Ibra and her daughter were moving things out, pretending that they had just learned that Leslie and Eric had spent the night together. The Leslies arrived just in time. If they had arrived a few hours later, the investigation would have been significantly delayed due to the Ibra's suspicious actions. The police discovered blood stains in the house and a messy bedroom, suggesting that Eric's mother and sister had spent the day packing things, including furniture, instead of cleaning up evidence of the crime. This suggests that the family was planning a long-term escape, possibly to reunite with Eric and his father, Jose, in Mexico, where they had fled to avoid justice. However, when she met Leslie's family, Mrs. Ibra may have realized that their opportunity to leave had passed, leaving behind incriminating evidence. In a state of panic, Eric's mother and sister began to deny any knowledge of Leslie and Eric's evening together. It was this suspicious behavior that raised concerns that something terrible had happened. Fortunately, the Las Vegas Police Department acted immediately and sent out a payment investigation with the aim of tracking Leslie's movements since the previous night. However, it took some time to get the data. Leslie's family couldn't wait any longer, so they launched a campaign to spread information about Leslie's disappearance. People responded and started actively sharing information on social media. No one expected so many people to be interested. Eric's mother was especially surprised. On August 31st, Ms. Ibra went to the police station to file a missing person report for her husband and son. She informed the police that her son Eric had left home late on the evening of August 28 and returned the next morning, behaving strangely. She later saw him leave the house again, but he never returned. Police observed a strange situation when not only Leslie, but also Eric and his father were missing. This discovery prompted an investigation into the disappearance of all three. With the involvement of Las Vegas police, police began combing the neighborhood, looking for surveillance footage that might have captured important information. Fortunately, a breakthrough was made when surveillance cameras were discovered right across the street from Eric's house. Furthermore, police obtained payment data, which helped them piece together Leslie's movements in the early morning hours of the 29th. After reviewing this data, police learned that the couple had gone to the casino and then to a bar. Arriving around 2:15 a.m., Leslie's cell phone was left at the bar, and records showed that she left around 5:50 a.m. Shortly thereafter, at 6:05 a.m., Eric's car was seen pulling up in front of their house on neighborhood cameras. Eric helped Leslie out of the car and into the house, and it was clear that she was intoxicated. Then, at 7:25 a.m., Eric and his father Jose were seen carrying Leslie's body, wrapped in a sheet, out of the house and placing it in the trunk of their car. Eric then drove away, while Jose used a hose to clean the driveway. These actions suggested that Eric and Jose were not missing, but rather were trying to escape justice. After reviewing the footage, police obtained a search warrant for Eric's home. During the search, police found significant additional evidence that Leslie had not left the house voluntarily. Despite efforts to clean the house with cleaning products, the evidence remained. Rubber gloves and trash bags were discovered, and a key piece of evidence was found in Eric's room. Blood was found on the floor and on Eric's bed, indicating that an assault had clearly taken place. Even without DNA testing, police were certain that the blood belonged to Leslie. Leslie Palacio was no longer missing, and police focused their efforts on finding her body. Police are actively searching for suspects Eric and Jose. Leslie's family, despite their grief, is still trying to enlist members of the church community to help find their daughter's body. As volunteers search, flyers and posters with Leslie's photo and images of Eric and Jose appear on social media and in newspapers. Leslie's family asked for the public's help in locating the two men involved in Leslie's death, as stated in the flyer. The first major break in the investigation came when a license plate reader detected Eric's car just 6 miles from his home around 10 a.m. on August 29th. He was on his way home just 4 hours after Leslie's murder. This new information led police to conclude that Eric's potential hiding spot was within a 4-hour drive of his home, possibly near the Nevada-Arizona border or the Charleston Peak area, a vast area of land. Police desperately needed more information to pinpoint a specific location. Fortunately, a gas station 40 miles north of Las Vegas captured footage of Eric's car leaving the freeway heading toward Valley of Fire National Park. The car returned 20 minutes later with mud on its tires. The discovery focused the search within a 20-mile radius of the gas station. Mud on the tires indicated that Eric had driven off the road at some point. Police searched the area, with volunteers combing hundreds of acres. On September 9th, during a second search effort, Leslie Palacio's body was discovered hidden near a bush. News of the 22-year-old's body being found near the Valley of Fire, 11 days after she went missing, quickly spread to news outlets. A reporter provided additional details about the prime suspect, 25-year-old Eric Ranglibarra. The extreme temperatures of the Valley of Fire, where Leslie's body was found, caused the body to decompose quickly, and forensic experts were unable to determine an exact cause of death. Locals were horrified and scared by Leslie's death. Some were afraid to go out because they constantly thought of the criminals involved in the murder. The day after Leslie's body was discovered, on September 10th, a large group of friends, relatives, neighbors, and people in the area gathered to remember Leslie. They placed candles from the night vigil outside Leslie's home and expressed their desire for the person responsible for her death to be held accountable. However, the pursuit of justice was not over. A significant breakthrough occurred when Eric's car was discovered in Moreno Valley, California. Police then contacted Eric's cousin, who revealed that he had driven Jose and Eric to San Pedro, where they were believed to have planned to cross the border into Mexico. Due to jurisdictional issues, the Las Vegas Police Department sought assistance from the FBI to further investigate the case. The investigation stalled until January 19, 2021, when Eric's father, Jose, turned himself in at the border. This development brought significant relief, as one of the fugitives was finally apprehended. Jose was quickly extradited to Clark County, where he faced charges of destroying evidence and being an accessory to murder. During questioning, Jose attempted to minimize his involvement in the crime, telling a story about his son's trip to Mexico on the morning of August 29th. However, police, shown surveillance video footage, dismissed his false claims. Footage clearly showed him helping carry Leslie's body out of the house and washing the driveway. Confronted with the evidence, Jose changed his story. He said he was working in the garage when Eric carried Leslie's body, wrapped in a sheet, into the garage. According to Jose, he panicked and helped his son put the body in the truck, assuming that Leslie had died of an illegal drug overdose. Court records show that Jose initially told police that Eric claimed Leslie died of an illegal drug overdose. Jose also said that Eric expressed a desire to end his life, blaming himself for Leslie's death, and that Jose's father thought it best to take his son to Mexico. When asked about Eric's current location, Jose explained that they had entered Mexico and boarded a bus, but the bus was stopped and searched by Mexican police. This caused them to become frightened and separate. As a result, Jose claimed that he wanted to help with the investigation but did not know where his son was. On June 18, 2021, Jose Ibarra pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and being an accessory to murder. Despite the seriousness of his crimes, he was sentenced to only 2 years in the Clark County Detention Center. This lenient sentence shocked and outraged Leslie's family and the community. Jose Ibarra attended the trial online, while Leslie's family and friends attended in person. They asked the judge to impose a harsher sentence, arguing that 2 years was not enough for someone who helped dispose of the body and hide the perpetrator. Jose Ibarra apologized to Leslie's family, saying that his love for his son had clouded his judgment. He expressed remorse for his actions, but Leslie's family did not accept his apology. They were still not satisfied, as Eric's whereabouts were still unknown and he continued to live freely in Mexico. Jose was released from prison on April 28, 2022, after serving 8 months and 15 days. This development outraged Leslie's family, who felt that justice had not been served. Their lawyer, Ophelia Markarian, expressed her frustration, saying it was unfair that the prime suspect was still at large while a person involved in the cover-up of the murder was freed after a short sentence. Leslie's case highlights significant flaws in the justice system, raising concerns about the fairness of how serious crimes are handled. The Leslie family is committed to fighting to change Nevada law to ensure that those involved in the murder face prison terms longer than the current 2 years. They are determined to find the perpetrators, prosecute them and punish them appropriately in the United States. Ophelia Markarian is using media interviews to reach out to anyone with information about Eric's whereabouts in Mexico, calling for justice for the Leslie family, even if it is only a small part. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Madison Sparrow. Madison Elizabeth Sparrow was born on September 12, 2003, in Norfolk, Virginia, United States. She is the daughter of Heather Sparrow Murphy and Richard Prestige. In her family, Madison has older sisters Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn, who was born in 1999 in Durango, Colorado, is Madison's older sister from her father's previous relationship. The family later settled in Newark, Newcastle County, Delaware. On October 5, 2010, her family welcomed a new member, baby Molly. Madison loves children and often takes on the role of the eldest in the family, which includes 8 cousins. She enjoys doing things that make people happy and frequently spends time playing with children or participating in entertainment shows such as magic shows. It is easy to catch Madison in a happy moment. Her laughter is contagious, showing her youthful and cheerful spirit. However, Madison can also be thoughtful and dreamy at times. Madison's father said that since she was a child, she has displayed her wisdom through careful observation and reflection before making decisions. Additionally, she is a very emotional person. Her warm hugs can uplift anyone's mood. For her friends and family, Madison is always a reliable confidant who genuinely cares about the happiness of those she loves. Madison is a curious girl who loves to explore new things, which led her to join the Girl Scouts, an organization for girls around the world. By the fall of 2012, all the Girl Scout troops were full, but thanks to her mother's efforts, Madison was able to join a group. Madison's mother led a new Brownies troop, and Madison joined at age 9. In recent years, Madison has become one of the top cookie sellers, winning numerous medals for her impressive sales. She has been involved with the Girl Scouts for nearly 10 years, during which time she has built a strong network of friendships. Currently, Madison volunteers with her younger SI. Stir Molly's troop, as she enjoys working with other young people and making a positive impact on their lives. Madison is a kind and generous girl who acts with commitment to her faith in God and service to her country. She is passionate about helping others and strictly adheres to the principles of the Girl Scouts. However, like any other young girl, Madison also enjoys spending time having fun and living life to the fullest. Even in her teenage years, she is always the life of the parties. She often plans parties with her friends, ranging from movie nights to full-blown beauty parties with manicures and pedicures. Madison frequently stays up all night, so it is not unusual for her to struggle to wake up by noon the next day. Before finishing elementary school, Madison met Annika Stalczynski, a girl her age who was born in Newark on July 9, 2003. They quickly became close friends and studied for exams together. Information about Annika's life is limited, but it is known that her parents are Robert Stalczynski and Robin Kars. In 2004, her family lived on Arona Mink Drive in Newark. After finishing elementary school, Annika and Madison went to middle school, where they made a new friend named Noah Sharp. Noah, a native of Newark, was born on August 23, 2001. Little is known about Noah's family and background, except that his mother, Nikki Sharp, has two other children, David and Brianna. The trio often went out for ice cream or spent time in the large green spaces around the city. When Noah and Madison met by chance, they felt an attraction to each other, and after just a few months, a teenage romance developed. At first, they were madly in love, but in early 2020, after more than a year together, Madison decided to break up with Noah without providing any reasons. They parted ways amicably and agreed to remain friends, but Noah was heartbroken because he still loved her deeply. During this time, Annika became Noah's trusted friend. They began to see each other more often and text almost every day. Although Noah's heart was still broken, he began dating another girl after a while. Despite his relationship with Annika, Noah kept in touch with Madison. He visited Madison on her 17th birthday, September 12, 2020, and brought her a gift. It seemed that Noah was still upset about the breakup. When Annika learned about her boyfriend's meeting with his ex-girlfriend, she felt jealous. She could not accept that he was still friends with his ex. Noah's sadness also turned to anger. He wanted to hurt Madison because he felt hurt. The following week, blinded by hatred and jealousy, Annika and Noah began planning to end Madison's life. They exchanged text messages, used FaceTime, and met in person to discuss weapons and how to dispose of the body after the crime. The messages they sent each other while planning the attack were horrifying and revealed their intention to cause Madison great pain. Annika made several suggestions, including using a knife to inflict serious damage to her heart. They also discussed the possibility of using a handgun or another blunt object. According to official documents, they quickly dismissed the idea of a handgun because it would make too much noise. Although Noah was not entirely confident, they decided to use a blunt object. During their discussions, they calculated the number of bricks they would need to hold Madison's body underwater if they decided to dump her there. When in doubt, one idea was to bury her since Noah could dig a hole and knew where to find a shovel. Eventually, they came up with what they believed was the perfect plan. Madison was an ice cream lover and also cherished Halloween. She eagerly awaited October each year to celebrate her favorite holiday. Throughout the month, Annika had been studying Madison's interests and taking advantage of them. On Friday, October 2, 2020, she called Madison to ask her out for ice cream and to spend a day together. Madison agreed because she hadn't seen her friend in a long time, and also wanted to buy a gift for Molly, whose birthday was just 3 days away. That day, Madison wore black tights, denim shorts, gray boots, a blue sweatshirt that said New Jersey, and white ghost earrings. She rarely wore jewelry, especially earrings, but since she didn't have much time to prepare for Halloween, Madison decided to buy these earrings to match the holiday. At 2:44 p.m., she said goodbye to her mother, Heather, promised to see her later, and then left. Although nothing unusual happened at that time, the events that followed were extremely unsettling. That was the last time her mother saw her alive. Just hours later, Heather began receiving abusive text messages from Madison's phone number, along with information suggesting that Madison was supposed to be leaving the country. Heather thought it was a joke. She replied and wished Madison good luck in her endeavor, joking that she had forgotten to bring her passport, which was in the safe. However, Heather received no response. Even when she called her daughter, no one answered. Heather, who was hanging out with Molly and taking her to scout meetings and swimming lessons, was confused. The lack of response began to worry her. Heather decided to call Annika, knowing that they would meet later in the day. When Annika answered, she burst into tears and explained that Madison had insulted her and that she had dropped her off near a store. Annika then suggested contacting Noah, but he did not respond. Frustrated, Heather asked Annika to contact Noah again. The three of them chatted but did not get any information. Frustrated, Heather decided to go home. On the way home, Heather received several messages from her daughter's friends, who had also received strange messages and wanted to know what was going on. When she got home and did not search for any clues, Heather found no signs that her daughter had run away. Even the money she had received for her birthday, her clothes, and her C.D. cards were in her room. These messages were strange and nonsensical. Madison had no reason to run away, especially without a bag containing her clothes and money. When Madison did not return home at around 8:30 p.m., Heather contacted 911 and reported her daughter missing. Despite repeated attempts to reach out to people, all her efforts were in vain. After being informed of the situation, Heather's parents traveled from another city to support their daughter. Furthermore, she notified Madison's father, with whom she had divorced, who now lived in Colorado. He quickly shared the information on social media, calling for help in finding his daughter. On Saturday, October 3, 2020, the search for Madison, 17, who was reported missing, continued. Delaware State Police issued a yellow alert to activate all necessary procedures to search for missing persons. Over the course of 2 days, police search teams, family and friends searched farms near the University of Delaware, where Madison was last seen. The media also disseminated information about the search, asking people to come forward with any details. Delaware State Police have begun questioning Madison's friends, and evidence points to her ex-boyfriend as a suspect. According to information, the girl went to the woods in Newark behind the elementary school, where she was also seen with Noah on the day she went missing. Detectives then detained and questioned him for nearly 9 hours from October 4th to 5th, but he claimed he had no idea what had happened. He eventually confessed to his actions and revealed that Annika was an accomplice. He explained that Annika hated Madison because she was jealous of their relationship. He also shared his deep feelings about breaking up with her. According to Noah's testimony, he drove Madison to the woods behind the elementary school, then hid behind the bushes with an aluminum baseball bat. As Madison happily walked along the trail, he suddenly emerged from his hiding place and hit Madison twice in the head. Noah admitted to putting all his strength into the second blow, adding that it was then that he became enraged after months of losing control over the girl who had broken his heart. Unable to control himself, he continued to strike her body multiple times. After the attack, the two used Annika's car to transport her body to a location near the intersection of I-95 and the Delaware state line, about 15 minutes away from the scene and near a warehouse. Once there, they attempted to drown the body in the river. Unsuccessful, they opted to bury it in a shallow grave they dug in the same location. Armed with detailed information from the suspect, investigators carefully searched the designated area. There, they discovered an aluminum baseball bat used as a weapon, with traces of blood. The crime scene also revealed the victim's clothing, with some items showing evidence of having been burned. The suspect then led law enforcement to a large plot of land near the intersection of I-95 and the Delaware state line, where he and his accomplice had secretly buried the body. On Monday, October 5, 2020, Corporal Heather Piper announced the discovery of Madison's body. The news sent shockwaves through the victim's family, friends, and community. Several days later, on Saturday, October 9, hundreds gathered at the high school football field to remember and honor Madison. An autopsy revealed that Madison died from blunt force trauma to the head. Experts also found the DNA of Noah and Annika on physical evidence collected at the scene and where the bodies were found. Noah faces charges of first-degree murder, possession of a deadly weapon during the commission of a felony, and first-degree conspiracy. He has been placed in a correctional facility on a $1 million bail. More than a month after the tragic event and after processing the necessary evidence, Annika, 17, was also arrested. She was indicted by a Newcastle County grand jury on charges of first-degree murder, possession of a deadly weapon during the commission of a felony, and first-degree conspiracy. Meanwhile, Madison's family has been struggling. Heather has repeatedly stated that the exact cause of her daughter's death may never be known. Although Noah admitted his guilt to the police, he did not plead guilty in his formal court filing. This has led to speculation that his defense attorney may argue that he was mentally unstable. In some cases, attorneys often attempt to defend their clients by referring to their mental health status. Similarly, during a preliminary hearing, Noah's attorney stated that Noah was being treated for schizophrenia and was under the care of a psychiatrist at the time of the murder. Noah's attorney confirmed that he had been injured in Chester County, Pennsylvania, about 3 weeks before the murder. The attorney explained that Noah had suffered memory loss and other problems as a result of the head injury. However, the attorney did not provide specific information about the cause and severity of the injury. In May 2021, Annika pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and first-degree conspiracy. Her attorneys negotiated with prosecutors, and Annika agreed to testify against Noah regarding his intention to kill Madison. Several people close to the victim had reported to the police about alter ego, Noah's alleged alter ego. However, prosecutors argued that Noah himself had disseminated this information, intending to use it at trial later as part of his plan to kill Madison. After 2 years of waiting, the defendant's trial began on October 20, 2022, in Newcastle County. During the proceedings, approximately 30 witnesses were called, primarily by Deputy Attorney General Matt Foley and an assistant prosecutor. The courtroom played hours of video recordings of Noah's interviews with state police detectives. Viewers heard Noah's changing story until he finally confessed. The defense tried to challenge this evidence, arguing that the police had interrogated their client for too long. Attorney Monica Jerome noted that the detectives interfered with the interrogation, directing Noah to say what they wanted and forcing him to say it. However, most people viewed this as a last-ditch effort to justify the murderer in any way possible. The prosecution presented text messages exchanged between Noah and Annika, which they claimed showed that the two had planned the crime. Faced with this evidence, the defense attempted to convince the court that someone else had control of the suspect's device and that he was not the one who contacted Annika. However, the testimonies of Noah's mother and brother contradicted each other several times when they were called to testify. Nikia stated that her son came home on the evening of October 2nd without being wet. Meanwhile, David said that his brother was wet and looked like he had just come out of a swamp. Nikia reported that when her son arrived home, Annika came in and seemed normal. David, on the other hand, claimed that Annika came in angry and slammed the door. Prosecutor Matt Froley asked Nikia if she had discussed the evidence against Noah with him, to which she replied no. However, prosecutors obtained a recording of a phone call that took place a month before the trial, in which the defendant and his mother discussed surveillance camera footage at the elementary school. During that conversation, Noah informed his mother that his face was not visible in the video showing him and Annika near the school an hour before Madison was murdered. His mother reacted with relief at this news. However, the video showed an African-American man of similar height and build to Noah, holding a baseball bat while walking into the woods with a girl. The defense questioned the defendant's relatives about the two injuries he allegedly sustained. The first was a head injury on September 13, 2020. The second was another unconfirmed injury he suffered after falling off his bike, just hours before his police interview on October 4th. Noah's lawyers argued that these injuries could have caused dissociative amnesia, attempting to justify the statements he made to the police. The court considered the arguments of both the prosecution and the defense regarding the victim's injuries. Annika, the accused, gave a 3-hour testimony that supported the prosecution's arguments. During her testimony, she calmly explained that Noah had convinced her that Madison had talked badly about her behind her back. However, Madison's family and friends insisted that she had never spoken ill of her friends. After 8 days of trial and more than 250 pieces of evidence presented by the prosecutors, the jury took just 3 hours to reach its final verdict. Noah Sharp was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the jury's verdict was announced, neither Noah nor his mother showed any emotion, Noah simply reneged and smiled at his mother. The Madison family cried tears of relief before leaving the courtroom. In Annika's case, when she was convicted, prosecutors stated that under Delaware law, she would be sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, since she was a juvenile at the time of the crime. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Zoe Sarnacki. Zoe Sarnacki was born on March 25, 1991, in Portland, Maine, a city in the northwest of the United States. She was raised in a loving family consisting of her parents, John and Linda Sarnacki, her brother Gregory, and 2 half-sisters, with whom she still maintains a close relationship. Zoe's father, John, worked as a construction worker and provided well for the family. As a result, Zoe was exposed to a variety of creative activities from a young age, which led to her strong interest in art. Her family also loved animals and had 5 cats at home. As Zoe grew older, she became increasingly curious and developed a strong desire to travel and experience different cultures. She also adopted a vegan lifestyle, choosing to consume only plant-based foods and avoiding animal products. Zoe was raised in an ecologically conscious culture that prioritized animal welfare, environmental conservation, and healthy living. This culture played a major role in shaping her personality. By the time she started high school in 2005, Zoe had already built up a large group of friends who considered her to be cheerful, enthusiastic, and friendly. However, things changed in 2008 when Zoe made a shocking decision on her 17th birthday. She decided to drop out of school. Her friends and family were surprised by the decision, and her parents were particularly unhappy with her choice. Despite this sudden change, Zoe's former classmates remember her fondly, describing her as a kind and loving person. A few months after leaving school, Zoe found a job at a local bakery and cafe called Bagel Works, marking the beginning of a new chapter in her life. On March 25, 2009, Zoe's 18th birthday, she was looking forward to getting a tattoo on one of her arms. Inspired by the works of Austrian artist Gustav Klimt, she had a clear idea of the design she wanted. Zoe went to a tattoo parlor in the Old Port area. There, she met 27-year-old tattoo artist Chad Gurney. They quickly formed a bond, and after just a few days of meeting, Zoe agreed to start a romantic relationship with him. Notably, their 9-year age gap did not stop her from pursuing a relationship with Chad. Chad had a unique background. Born and raised in Maine, he attended Wells High School, where he was known as the goalie for lacrosse, a competitive sport played between two teams using a small rubber ball and a long-handled stick. After graduating from high school, Chad moved to Lynchburg, Virginia, to attend Liberty University, an institution known for its ties to the famous evangelical pastor Jerry Falwell. Chad has many tattoos on his body, most of which depict aliens. One design stands out, a gray alligator tattoo. In the context of tattoos, alien designs can mean two things. One is that the person believes in the existence of beings from other planets, and two is that it reflects the personality of the person wearing the tattoo, who is trying to say that they do not fit into this world, that they are different from others, and that they are unique. As for the reptile tattoo, it is said to symbolize danger and hostility, a predator to be avoided. Before moving to Portland in 2005, Chad had a difficult time recovering from a near-fatal car accident in Alabama that had occurred 4 years earlier. On a trip to a lacrosse game, a local van carrying players and coaches was hit from behind by a car and pushed into the oncoming lane, where it collided with a large truck. The impact threw Chad from the van and he nearly lost his leg. He has undergone approximately 20 surgeries due to severe head injuries. Chad underwent a psychiatric evaluation following his accident, which revealed that he had cognitive impairments. These impairments affected his speech, memory, and mathematical reasoning. After the accident, Chad received a large settlement from a lawsuit, allowing him to become financially independent. Years later, in 2007, Chad sought treatment for anxiety and depression. He was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and organic personality disorder. In 2009, Chad traveled to Hawaii alone, where he met Zoe. Chad and Zoe began dating and decided to have an open relationship, which meant they were free to see other people. After starting their relationship, Chad continued to travel. In May 2009, he took a weekend trip to Vancouver, a city in Canada. When Chad returned to Portland, Zoe confessed to him remorsefully that while he was away, she had had an affair with another man and had sex with him. At first, Chad did not seem to mind the affair, as they had previously agreed to maintain an open relationship. However, after this confession, Chad changed and began to insist that Zoe quit her job and go with him to Thailand. Zoe refused him, not knowing the devastating consequences that would follow. On May 25, 2009, Zoe came to Chad's apartment and took a nap because she was tired. While she was sleeping, Chad violently attacked her. He grabbed her by the neck, hit her in the head, and strangled her until she died. After Zoe died, Chad continued to commit crimes, including having sex with her body and then decapitating her. After committing the crime, Chad showered, dressed and drove to a nearby gas station to fill up the tank, showing a disturbing calmness after committing such a heinous act. Chad returned to his apartment, where he poured petrol over Zoe, creating a trail of fuel leading to the front door. He then set it on fire. Before the fire spread throughout the apartment, Chad quickly grabbed a backpack filled with items for his trip to Thailand, a laptop and a handgun. After the apartment was completely engulfed, Chad went to an ATM to withdraw cash and then checked into the Old Orchard Beach Motel, where he relaxed in the hot tub. A 911 call was made and emergency services were alerted to the fire at Chad's apartment. Police arrived quickly on the scene and extinguished the fire. Upon entering the building, they discovered a horrific scene. Inside the charred ruins of the apartment was a badly burned body surrounded by crosses and other religious objects. A neighbor called Chad to report that his house was on fire. Chad replied that he was out of town, headed to his hometown of Lewiston, and quickly ended the call. 2 days later, on May 26, Chad spoke to his best friend and confessed to killing Zoe, calmly explaining the events that led up to it. He appeared rational, claiming that he was exhausted from the pain and had lost control of himself. While driving through the streets of Portland, Chad carelessly ran a red light and was pulled over by a city police officer. During the stop, Chad claimed that a previous accident in 2005 had left him with mental health issues, and he asked his friend to explain this to the police over the phone. After a conversation with his friend and the police, Chad voluntarily went to the police station and confessed to Zoe's murder. The police then seized his belongings. A forensic examination of Chad's computer discovered a video of the gruesome scene on his hard drive, titled "Woman Half Decapitated Over Suspicion of Adultery." At least if she cheated, she wouldn't do it again. This incriminating evidence was later presented to the court. On Wednesday, May 27, Zoe's high school held a moment of silence during class to honor her. Before lunch, teachers and students were informed of the tragic incident. Later that day, Christine Koo, Zoe's half-sister, issued a statement to local media on behalf of the family. She stressed that this was no ordinary murder, as the perpetrator, Chad, had committed many heinous acts. Christine reported that the police had informed her of the shocking events surrounding Zoe's murder. According to them, Chad had brutally attacked Zoe in a fit of rage, sexually assaulted her, and then set her body on fire. He then calmly went to a motel and got into a hot tub. A week after Zoe's tragic death, on June 2, 2009, a vigil was held in front of Chad's former apartment building. The vigil served as a moment of comfort for Zoe's loved ones and friends. Many strangers, shocked and outraged by the brutal crime, attended. It is estimated that more than 150 people attended the vigil and memorial service for Zoe. Candles and flowers were placed on the steps of the building where her life was tragically ended in memory of Zoe. Zoe's father, John, and her half-sister, Courtney, attended the vigil and were deeply moved by the outpouring of support from so many people. During the investigation, police interviewed Chad's friends and acquaintances, who said he was on a spiritual quest and had plans to travel to Thailand to study Eastern religions. His apartment was said to be decorated with many spiritual artifacts and symbols. Chad's personality seemed to be a mixture of contradictions. On the one hand, he was known to be kind and charming, often giving small gifts to those around him. He also expressed a desire to use the money he received from an accident to help humanity. However, Chad also had a harder side, with tattoos on his arms and a reputation for provocative and confrontational behavior. Those who knew Chad noted that his behavior often pushed people away. Robert Collins, a 24-year-old chef who knew Chad, recalled that people would often ignore him and turn away when Chad came to parties. Chad also confided to Robert that the only thing he truly sympathized with was pain, which was further emphasized by the word pain tattooed on his knuckles. Police and prosecutors have made great efforts to gather every piece of information about this brutal crime. Steve Weir, who rented an apartment from Chad in 2006, was also questioned. He mentioned religious paintings and artifacts in Chad's apartment and said Chad told him he was interested in theology but did not practice it. Watson Atkinson, a tattoo parlor owner in Portland, recalled a conversation with Chad in which Chad shared his plans to use his accident compensation to find direction in his life. However, Watson's impression of Chad was disturbing because Chad seemed to focus on teenage girls, which worried him so much that he forbade his 16-year-old daughter from communicating with Chad, and also repeatedly warned Zoe to stay away from him. An investigation into Chad's background revealed his medical history and mental health diagnoses, but subsequent evaluations by multiple psychologists during his incarceration found no evidence of delusions or hallucinations. In conversations with professionals, Chad expressed strong emotions related to his perception of Zoe's infidelity, which he claimed had frustrated him. According to court documents, he claimed that he was fed up with all his girlfriend's infidelity. He began thinking about killing Zoe when she confessed her infidelity to him. As the trial began, a 127-minute tape of the police interview was played. The tape was recorded 12 hours after the crime and featured Chad speaking to Denham police. In the recording, Chad described his relationship with Zoe as extremely close, with Zoe sometimes staying at his apartment for up to a week. He denied any history of fighting between them and believed they were destined for each other. Chad also admitted to taking Zoe's life, describing her as the most beautiful girl he had ever met and feeling he had a responsibility to tell the truth about what had happened. During his conversation with the police, Chad remained calm and apologized frequently, breaking down in tears several times. He recounted the events of May 25, 2009, saying that Zoe was napping. Chad said that he approached her and began to strangle her, causing Zoe to defend herself and scream for him to stop. According to Chad, when Zoe resisted, he hit her in the head and continued to strangle her until she lost consciousness and stopped breathing. He then detailed the next terrifying actions he performed on her body. Chad revised his testimony, saying that he used 3 knives instead of a samurai sword. He described how he placed a cross between his legs and recounted his actions while Zoe's body burned in the apartment. Chad called himself a terrible person. When questioned about the beheading, Chad claimed that he was trying to turn Zoe's death into a ritual of forgiveness. Chad said he felt haunted on the day of the murder and that everything in his life seemed to have gone dark. He described himself as a primitive person, acting on instinct for hours, which led him to commit the heinous act. The recording of the interrogation, which became key evidence in Cumberland County Superior Court, was heard in its entirety by Judge Roland Cole during the first trial. It was revealed that Chad faced serious consequences, at least 25 years in prison, or possibly life in prison. However, if his mental disorder was recognized, he could be sent to a psychiatric facility in Austin. During the 2011 trial, it was determined that Chad had strangled the victim in a fit of rage. The question remains whether Chad would agree to this testimony, since he had waived his right to a jury trial. Prosecutors argued that Chad, a former Liberty University student and lacrosse champion, was fully aware of his actions. To support this claim, they presented testimony from a psychiatrist and a psychologist, both of whom agreed that Chad understood the gravity of his actions and decided to violently kill his girlfriend. Chad's defense team continued to emphasize his mental health struggles, arguing that he was out of control. On January 11, 2012, Chad's attorneys filed a motion with the Supreme Court to exclude from the case evidence found on Chad's personal computer at the time of his arrest. This evidence included a gruesome video in which he demonstrated how to decapitate an unfaithful woman. The defense argued that the video was inadmissible as evidence. Ultimately, nearly 3 years after the crime, Chad Gurney, then 30, was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the murder of Zoe Sarnacki and an additional 25 years for arson. The judge ruled that the sentences would run consecutively. Chad's lawyers challenged the sentence, but their appeal was rejected. Zoe's family members were disappointed that Chad did not receive a life sentence. During sentencing, the presiding judge said that Chad had a distorted view of the world, but the court's main concern was whether the defendant knew that his actions were wrong. Chad's lawyer, Sarah Churchill, presented her case to the Supreme Court, claiming that Chad's concussion and other injuries from the 2005 accident had left her client in a state of confusion and delusion. She argued that the judge erred in finding Chad guilty, particularly that the search warrant should not have included his smartphone, laptop, and social media pages. Sarah Churchill argued that the court should have focused more on evidence of Chad's psychosis and unstable mental state at the time of the crime, rather than evidence found on his digital devices. The Deputy Attorney General told the court that Chad was accused of killing Zoe as an act of revenge for having an affair with another man. The Deputy Attorney General explained that a video appeared to show Chad sexually assaulting Zoe as punishment for an infidelity that he considered a betrayal. The Deputy Attorney General clarified that the prosecution did not use any information from social media to build its case against Chad. He argued that the evidence convincingly demonstrated that the defendant was fully aware of his actions at the time of the crime. After the verdict was announced, Kathy Kozev, Zoe's aunt, shared with reporters that throughout the trial she felt extremely distressed as she witnessed Chad's sight and voice, taking her back to the traumatic final moments of her niece's life. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jane Hilton. Jane was a familiar face in El Dorado Hills, California. She wrote for the Foothill Times and often reported on local social events. Jane had 6 children, whom she loved dearly and often inspired through her daily poetry. After earning her real estate license, she married Archie Hilton in 1984, but the marriage fell apart in July 1985. Seeking help, Jane approached her former boss, Will McLean, who owned a large house in El Dorado Hills. Will's daughter, Maureen Klein, lived there with her boyfriend. Will's nephew, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl, were also staying in another room in the house. On July 6, 1985, Will invited Jane and his youngest daughter, Autumn Anchor, to live in his house. Will's house was crowded and had a lot of people coming and going. However, Jane and Autumn's first night there would be their last. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis, 20, and his girlfriend Connie Dahl, 19, returned from a party and found Autumn wandering around outside. Autumn said she had been attacked and feared her mother would be angry. The 3 of them then went inside, where they found traces of blood in the hallway. When they entered the first room, which belonged to Ricky's mother, Maureen, the air became quiet. On the bed, they found the bloody body of Jane Hilton. She had stopped breathing. Because Maureen and her boyfriend were away on a camping trip and were not home at the time, Ricky and Connie called 911. Paramedics and police arrived at the scene, but Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. She had been stabbed 29 times, beaten, and bitten on the shoulder. This senseless murder led investigators to begin questioning those closest to Jane. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was at the top of the list of suspects. He was interviewed and provided a solid alibi, including DNA. Initially, Archie Hilton was the logical choice because their marriage was in trouble. However, he said that although they were having some difficulties, there was no sign that he and Jane were going to divorce. When Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl were interviewed, they both said that they came home early in the morning and found Autumn waiting outside. When they entered the house, they found the hallway carpet soaked in blood. The blood trail led them to the master bedroom, where they found Jane lying dead on the bloody mattress. The details and physical evidence in the case were scant, and the potential suspects all had alibis. The case gradually went cold. The cold case was reopened in 1999, and El Dorado County Sheriff's Department detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald were assigned to investigate. After a thorough review of the case file, they focused on a newspaper article about Connie Dahl, Ricky Davis's ex-girlfriend and Jane Hilton's roommate. In the article, Connie described the position of Jane's body when she was found, lying on the bed, as if someone had placed her in her usual sleeping position. However, this testimony contradicted Ricky Davis's earlier statement. Ricky had said on the recording that the body was found on the floor. But at the time, detectives thought they heard Ricky say that, but they weren't sure. Detectives questioned Connie for 3 hours. At first, she stuck to her story. But over the next 18 months, Connie was questioned 4 times. Each time, the detectives used techniques known to increase the likelihood of a false confession. They accused Connie of her role in the murder, and she was threatened with being charged with murder. As a result, Connie cooperated with the detectives, even though she had no actual role in the case. She was convicted of manslaughter and only served 1 year in prison. Detective Strasser and Fitzgerald lied to Connie, telling her that they would use DNA evidence to identify a suspect. In fact, no DNA evidence was collected or tested in this case. Instead, the investigators used crime scene photos and real events, such as the bite mark on Jane's shoulder, to provide information to Connie and guide her to recall events the way they wanted. Over the course of 4 interviews, Connie began to lose control and recall events from the case. However, this also allowed her to create a completely different story about the night of the murder, based on what she remembered and what investigators gave her. Connie Dahl gave conflicting accounts of Jane Hilton's murder. In one interview, she claimed that Autumn Anker was present at the crime scene and was shot. In another interview, she admitted that she may have bitten Jane's shoulder. Connie also claimed that the murder began with an argument between Ricky Davis and Jane, which stemmed from Ricky's desire for Autumn to join them at a party, which Jane refused. Despite changing her story to fit the facts, Connie could not recall the murder weapon or where it was hidden. However, she implicated her ex-boyfriend Ricky Davis in the case, making him the prime suspect. Following Connie's confession, detectives interviewed Ricky Davis and Autumn Anker. Both stuck to their original accounts of the case. The detectives attempted to deceive Ricky by telling him that Autumn had also implicated him in the murder, but he did not change his story. Autumn told the detectives that she had no reason to protect Ricky and would not be swayed by threats of charges. Despite using coercive interrogation techniques, the detectives were unable to get Ricky or Autumn to change their statements. Therefore, they used Connie's confession to arrest Ricky. Connie accepted a plea bargain, agreeing to testify against Ricky in exchange for a reduced sentence. At Ricky's first trial, the jury was unable to reach a verdict, leading to a retrial. However, at his second trial in 2005, the jury found him guilty. During the trial, Connie took the stand and testified against Ricky. She explained that she had wrestled with Jane and accidentally bit her shoulder. Connie then walked out, leaving Ricky alone with Jane. Once outside, she heard Jane screaming, pleading, and gagging as Ricky continued to assault her. Ricky was sentenced to 16 years in prison for second-degree murder, largely based on Connie's testimony. Connie, on the other hand, received a reduced sentence of manslaughter and a 1-year sentence in county jail. Unfortunately, she died of a drug overdose in 2014. Despite his conviction, Ricky maintained his innocence. In 2006, he contacted the Northern California Innocence Project, NCIP, for help in proving his innocence. NCIP, a nonprofit founded in 2001 by Kathleen Rodolphi and Linda Starr, provides DNA testing services to convicted prisoners who claim innocence. Ricky's case was reopened in 2006 after he contacted NCIP. NCIP and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office worked together to retest DNA from the crime scene. The retesting included Hilton's nightgown and biological material found under her fingernails. The retesting uncovered a DNA profile from an unidentified male. This DNA was found on both Hilton's fingernails and nightgown, indicating that they came from the same source. The results cleared Ricky, Connie, and Anker of any crimes. This also proved that Connie's testimony was false. The DNA test results also proved Archie Hilton innocent, but unfortunately, he had passed away by the time the results were released. The unidentified DNA profile was entered into the FBI's CODIS database, but no matches were found. While the new evidence supports Ricky's claim of innocence, there are still obstacles to overcome. NCIP successfully argued that if the DNA test results had been presented at Ricky's trial, the outcome might have been different. In California, the standard for overturning a conviction typically requires new evidence that clearly establishes innocence. This standard is extremely difficult to meet. An expert on false confessions, Richard Leo, reviewed the transcript of Connie Dahl's interview in 2015. He found that detectives used pressure techniques to force Connie to give a false confession that fit the detectives' preconceived ideas about Jane Hilton's murder. Then, in 2016, the Northern California Innocence Project, NCIP, helped sponsor Senate Bill 1134, which was intended to address these issues. The bill allows wrongfully convicted people like Ricky to prove that new evidence could convince a jury. It was passed in January 2017, after NCIP attorney Melissa O'Connell filed a motion for a new trial based on new DNA evidence. The bill was sponsored by former California State Senator Mark Leno and brings California standards in line with those of 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malakian overturned Ricky's 2005 conviction and ordered a new trial. It was originally scheduled to begin in the fall of 2019, but due to the health of his defense attorney, the judge announced the trial would take place in April 2020. However, the trial date changed again. Advances in DNA testing helped Ricky become the first person in California and only the second person in the United States to be exonerated of a crime. A new DNA testing method called genetic genealogy helped achieve this result. Genetic genealogy is a new DNA testing method that involves taking DNA evidence from the crime scene and sending it to genetic companies. These companies then search genealogical databases to find a potential match. In February 2020, the DNA evidence matched a man. In February 2020, El Dorado County District Attorney Vern Pearson announced that a new suspect had been identified in the death of Jane Hilton. The man was identified through DNA evidence collected from the crime scene. Following his arrest, several residents who knew the man revealed his identity to the media. The man is known as Michael Green, a longtime resident of Roseville, California. Michael graduated from Oakmont High School in 1986. According to those who knew him, Michael was a nice and easygoing person. They even described him as very calm and cool. So, a former friend of Michael could not understand why he would commit such a brutal act in El Dorado Hills. Michael was 17 years old at the time of the crime. On the night of July 6, 1985, Jane Hilton's daughter Autumn met Michael and his two friends, Calvin and Stephen, at a park. Autumn then decided to go home to shower and said she would come back to see her friends. However, she went to another friend's house instead of going back to the park. However, that evening, Autumn returned to the park to meet the boys again. What happened next is only speculation. Investigators believe Michael took advantage of the moment to break into Jane's home and was discovered by her. In the struggle to escape, Michael may have attacked Jane in a frenzy. After the attack, Jane's body was discovered by Ricky, Connie, and Autumn when they returned home. Michael had no criminal record before or after the murder. Michael appeared to have lived a normal life until DNA linked him to the gruesome crime. Two other boys who were with Michael were sought shortly after his arrest. One boy, Calvin, had died some time ago. However, another boy, Stephen, was found and questioned the day after the arrest. Stephen is considered a witness, not a participant in the case. Michael was arrested on February 11, 2020. As Michael was a juvenile at the time of the murder, He made his first appearance in juvenile court on February 19, 2020. Michael was then transferred so that he could be tried as an adult. Michael waited 2.5 years before he was tried in court. On July 29, 2022, Michael pleaded no contest. This means that Michael waived his right to a jury trial, and he will face a charge of first-degree murder. He also waived his opportunity to object to the plea. His sentencing date was set for September 27, 2022, with Judge Suzanne Kingsbury presiding. During the sentencing hearing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor of educational psychology, was called to testify about adolescent development. Kaufman's research shows that adolescents have a variety of developmental needs, including emotional and cognitive development. In late adolescence, young people can distinguish between right and wrong, but their ability to control their emotions declines. To provide additional information, the defense called several witnesses from Michael's childhood who had maintained relationships with him into adulthood. When asked about their views of Michael after learning of his confession, all agreed that they were shocked he had committed the murder of Jane Hilton. Those who knew Michael described him as cheerful, well-liked, funny, and lovable, both before and after the murder. Michael's ex-wife, Karen Green, said Mike was not evil at all. After the witnesses finished testifying, each of Jane Hilton's children gave victim impact statements. All described the unforgivable loss Michael had caused their family. Heather Purvis McConnell, Jane Hilton's daughter, said, "The pain that will never go away will always haunt me." Ardith Brandon, Hilton's fourth child, said, "I loved my mother and I think Michael loved her too. I want to know how he would feel or what he would say to the person who stabbed your mother 29 times. What would you do if you got a call in the early morning to tell you your mother was dead?" Ardith recounted collecting her mother's belongings from the house where she was killed and ended with a powerful statement, "We will always have something in common, regret for the stupid decision you made 37 years ago." Hilton's son, Ian, echoed his sister's sentiments. He went on to explain the hardships the family faced and the constant nightmares they endured, especially after being wrongly blamed for her sister Autumn. As he finished, he broke down in tears and said, "All the words we say will never bring my mother back." Autumn was the last to speak. Her testimony showed real pain as she recounted what she had been through over the past 2 decades. She recounted the day 2 detectives came to her home, telling her they had found the people responsible for her mother's death. She was later accused of biting her mother and helping move her body from the floor to the bed. Autumn said that if she had not sought the help of a lawyer at the time, she doesn't know how far the investigators' intimidation tactics could have gone. Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he questioned Michael about why he killed Jane in such a brutal manner. "You hit her. She had multiple injuries around her head and face. You kicked her in the jaw. You bit her shoulder. Why did you do that?" Linden went on to read a statement expressing that Michael did not just kill Jane, he destroyed many lives in the process. Linden then asked Michael if he thought about Jane and who she was. He pointed out her accomplishments and the love she had for each of her children. In her closing argument, Michael's defense attorney, Margaret Husher, emphasized that Michael was not in control of his actions. Margaret argued that Michael did not realize that his actions were wrong because he was a teenager at the time. This argument was based on expert testimony from Dr. Kaufman. She asked the court to consider a reduced sentence, reading various criminal codes and court rules. However, Judge Kingsbury interjected and stated that the court would not consider granting Michael probation, leaving the defense unable to add any further comment. In response, Linden thanked the court and said that the request for probation was an insult. He said it was like a slap in the face to the victim's family, who had suffered for decades. Linden stated that Michael had gotten away with murder for 37 years and that granting him probation would allow him to get away with more. Judge Kingsbury has heard many arguments about juvenile murder cases. In her 26 years as a judge, she said the murder of Jane Hilton was the most brutal. Before sentencing, Kingsbury asked the victims' family to forgive them for the pain they have endured. She also hoped they would overcome their pain, as that was their mother's wish. Kingsbury encouraged Michael Green to use all the resources available to him in the California Department of Rehabilitation. She said Michael could achieve parole if he used those resources. Kingsbury also said Michael had a great side and that he had a lot to offer. She also said he was young enough to be released and live a productive life. Michael Green was sentenced to life in prison and is being held in the El Dorado County Jail. He will then be transferred to the California Department of Rehabilitation. Restitution will be determined after further review by the court. Ricky Davis, who was wrongfully convicted of the murder, was released on February 13, 2020. He will be entitled to more than $750,000 in state compensation. However, his attorney argues that this amount does not make up for the years of freedom he has lost. Ricky continues to sue the state for damages covering the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020, for a whopping $18 million. The lawsuit is still pending as of 2022. In September 2022, California passed Assembly Bill 2644, which prohibits law enforcement officers from using threats, physical harm, deception, or manipulative interrogation tactics when interrogating people 17 years of age or younger. District Attorney Vern Pearson is calling on all law enforcement agencies to stop using intimidation tactics. He says the deceptive tactics that have been used for years will assume guilt and focus on getting a confession instead of getting the whole story. The El Dorado County DA's office will now dismiss any case where the main evidence is a confession obtained through threats, lies, or psychologically manipulative interrogation tactics. The measures are intended to ensure that no one is convicted based on a false, coerced confession like the one that Ricky Davis made. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Dawn Hatcheney. Dawn Marie Hatcheney was born on December 5, 1969, in Seattle, Washington. She is the eldest child and only daughter of Donald Hatcheney and Diana Parle. Her father worked in a shipyard, while her mother was a homemaker. Dawn grew up with her three brothers, Dennis, Darren, and Derek, in Bremerton, Washington. Dawn developed a strong faith from an early age. According to her mother, she accepted God into her life at the age of 4. However, her childhood was also challenging. Her parents struggled with anxiety and depression, which often led to frequent conflicts at home. When Dawn was about 11 years old, her mother, Diana, left the family for another man. This new relationship resulted in the birth of another child. However, the relationship did not last, and Diana eventually returned to the family, bringing her newborn child with her. Despite these hardships, Dawn did well in school. She worked hard to achieve good grades and overcome her challenges. Her hard work paid off when she entered the prestigious Scripps National Spelling Bee at age 12. This achievement not only led her to the White House, but also gave her the opportunity to meet former President Ronald Reagan. Dawn graduated as valedictorian from Bremerton Christian School in 1988 and then attended Northwest College of the Assemblies of God Church in Seattle. During her college years, she met Nick Hatcheney, and they quickly formed a close relationship. However, Dawn's friends were concerned when she called Nick her other half after only a few dates, as they worried that Nick's assertive personality might not be a good fit for her. They wanted Dawn to find someone who would be unwaveringly supportive and emotionally committed. Nick grew up in Poulsbo, Washington, and his childhood shared some similarities with Dawn's. However, his family life was difficult. His father, Dan, was often distant and busy with work, leaving Nick feeling neglected. Nick's mother, Sandra, was busy with home daycare and foster care, which left Nick feeling like he was not a priority to her. He even felt that his mother favored his biological siblings and adopted children over him, leading Nick to believe that she hated him. Nick struggled with the emotional distance between his parents, especially his mother's long-term depression and his father's lack of attention. As a result, Nick lacked emotional support and connection from his family, which had a profound impact on his life. Despite his isolation, Nick found comfort and faith in the Bible and Christianity, which boosted his confidence during his teenage years but occasionally led to social isolation due to his growing self-assurance. Nick and Dawn first met in college. Initially, Dawn's friends found it strange that she liked Nick because his personality was completely different from hers. She was outgoing and confident, while Nick was not. However, as Dawn spent more time with Nick, she began to change. She was no longer the confident, independent, and driven person she once was. Instead, she became shy and indecisive, often agreeing with Nick's decisions even when they were not right for her. Although their relationship seemed unhealthy, their love for each other remained strong. Nick proposed to Dawn on Alki Beach in 1990, and they were married on April 20, 1991. As newlyweds, they moved to Bremerton, where Dawn worked as a loan officer and Nick became a youth pastor at Christ Community Church on Bainbridge Island near Seattle. Nick had always aspired to be a youth pastor at Christ Community Church, where he had previously had a good relationship with a pastor named Smith. However, Nick gradually drifted away from Smith when he found doctrinal agreement with Pastor Robert Billy Craig. Robert saw Nick as nothing more than a tool to carry out his plan to overthrow Smith and take complete control of the church as senior pastor. Meanwhile, in 1997, Dawn and Nick faced housing problems due to frequent moves, living in houses they had renovated and sold. Dawn dreamed of having a family and a stable life. To solve this problem, Nick found a house in need of repair in East Bremerton and planned to move in, renovate it, and make it their home. However, the purchase and repair of the house put Nick and Dawn in debt. Although their relationship appeared perfect, with Dawn being Nick's supportive and accommodating wife, there were hidden problems that no one saw. Dawn even joked that if she and Nick broke up, Nick would stay with her instead of moving back to his parents' house. Meanwhile, Nick continued to borrow money from church members, putting him further into debt. He embarked on an ambitious project to start a Christian youth camp. Although the project was financially taxing, Nick committed to it because he had a strong desire to do so. Nick's story was closely related to Sandy Glass, a parishioner of Christ Community Church. When Nick was trying to find the right land to build his youth camp, Sandy confirmed once again that he had great ambitions. Sandy Glass's life had been full of ups and downs. She had faced many hardships in her life. Her first boyfriend died of an unknown illness, her father died in a construction accident, and her brother struggled with drug addiction. She married Jimmy, a carpenter, but their financial situation was strained because the family depended entirely on Jimmy's income while Sandy stayed home to care for the children. Sandy also struggled with her spending habits, often living beyond her means. This led to frequent arguments between her and Jimmy. These arguments sometimes caused Jimmy to express his frustration by yelling or withdrawing from the situation. To resolve their marital conflicts, Sandy and Jimmy sought help from the church and attended marriage counseling sessions coordinated by Nick. Nick had been the church's marriage counselor for many years. However, some parishioners filed complaints with Pastor Robert about Nick's counseling style. They were upset that Nick often asked personal questions and ignored other important issues. His discussions often focused on sexual issues, ignoring other aspects of marriage. Despite this, church members trusted Nick because he had the support of their former pastor, Smith. They felt that Nick would not have been entrusted with this role if he were not trustworthy. In the fall of 1997, Pastor Robert replaced Smith as senior pastor. Smith and his wife then left to do missionary work in Africa. Jimmy's parents, who were also church members, disagreed with his decision to seek church counseling. They were skeptical about Nick's qualifications and experience in guiding their son's marriage. When Nick focused primarily on Sandy, they became even more concerned because they felt he should focus on both of them equally. The relationship between Nick and Sandy went beyond the boundaries of a normal mentoring relationship. They spent too much time talking on the phone, meeting at church, and even outside. This made Jimmy's parents feel that their relationship was inappropriate as they interacted frequently and acted intimately. Pastor Robert's wife, Pamela, also noticed Nick's behavior and spoke to him privately. She expressed her concerns about his inappropriate behavior and advised him to focus on his own marriage. When complaints about Sandy and Nick's relationship arose, Robert had to intervene. He warned Sandy that her relationship with Nick was unacceptable and needed to end immediately. However, Sandy felt that she had a special connection with Nick. She wrote a letter to Robert, expressing her anger and frustration. In the letter, she stated that she felt Robert did not trust her. The relationship between Sandy and Nick had a negative impact on those around them. Dawn and Jimmy, along with Jimmy and Sandy's children, felt hurt by this. At one point, one of their children told Jimmy that Sandy and Nick had talked about Nick becoming their new father when Jimmy died. At church, Dawn began to share her grief with her friends. She told them about her financial situation and her desire to have children, but Nick was against the idea. By the end of 1997, Nick was romantically involved with several women besides Sandy. He spent time with them in private and on phone calls that lasted for hours. However, Sandy dreamed of the beautiful future she hoped to have with Nick. She encouraged him to invest more in the plan to open a youth camp and develop a romantic relationship with her. She believed that both of them were brought together by fate. A group of women in the congregation had tried to clear things up with Dawn, letting her know that the problems in her marriage with Nick had not been her fault, but rather Nick himself. However, her life had not turned out the way she had expected when she had married him. Back on Christmas, Dawn had woken up feeling unwell. Still, she and Nick had decided to visit her family and spend the day together. Later that evening, they had gone to Smith's house and spent time with his family. Early the next morning, the 26th, Nick had planned to go hunting with Lindsay Smith's daughter and her friends. Before leaving, Nick had met his friends at the Hood Canal Bridge in Jefferson County. After a few hours in the woods without catching anything, they had decided to return and have breakfast at a local diner around 9 a.m. While everyone was eating, Nick had suddenly become concerned and said that Dawn and he had not opened their Christmas presents. Around 9:30 a.m., Nick had left the diner and returned home. At 10 a.m., he had discovered that his wife had died in a fire. Investigators had discovered that the fire had initially started in Nick and Dawn's bedroom due to a faulty space heater. The space heater had burned fiercely and quickly spread due to the presence of newspapers and wrapping paper in the room. The situation had been made worse by the presence of multiple propane tanks on the floor. There had been a surprising detail in the story. Less than an hour earlier, Nick had told his friends at the diner that he and Dawn had not opened their Christmas presents. However, when he had spoken to the authorities, he had said that they had opened the presents the night before. Nick had explained that his wife, Dawn, had been feeling unwell and had gone to bed. He also had said he had received a propane tank as a Christmas gift. Because they had frequently renovated their home, they had to use a space heater during the winter. This type of heater often lacks modern safety features, leading to fires and deaths. The police had found no evidence that Nick's story had been false. As a local pastor, Nick had been well respected in the community and there had been no reason to suspect him of any involvement in his wife's death. Nick's congregation had tried to support him during what they had believed was a difficult time. Pastor Robert had suggested a way to try to ease Dawn's grief through prayer. However, Nick had rejected the idea, saying he had wanted Dawn to not experience any more pain. This rejection had surprised Pastor Robert, as Nick had previously been actively involved in church activities, including exorcisms. Mary Glass, Sandra's mother-in-law, had soon become suspicious of Nick's role in Dawn's death. She had thought that Dawn's death had not been an accident. She had urged her husband to contact the police to investigate, but this had not happened. Shortly thereafter, the police had determined that Dawn's death had been an accident and the case had been turned over to Nick's insurance company. Nick had received a large sum of money from his life insurance policy. This had been a bit strange to his friends and family, but they had later understood that Nick and Dawn's large debts and Nick's desire to build a youth camp had made him need the money. Some church members had found Nick's way of grieving for Dawn unusual, but they had not voiced their concerns because they had thought that people process grief differently. The church community then had held a celebration of Dawn's life, where family and friends had gathered to share stories about her and remember her life. During the celebration, Nick had shown remarkable composure throughout the funeral. Additionally, friends who had been helping clean Nick's house had discovered pictures of Dawn hidden in the back of a closet. This had suggested that Nick had wanted to remove memories of Dawn. Nick also had begun to show a cold and indifferent attitude towards many people, including some church members, neighbors, and friends. Nick's behavior had become even more suspicious when he had quickly developed a close relationship with Dawn's mother, Diana, under the guise of mourning his widowhood. This had shocked and outraged many. Even Pastor Robert could not stand Nick's behavior and had asked him to leave Christ Community Church. This expulsion had been a huge blow to Nick and marked the beginning of troubles in his life. On April 10, 2001, Sandy and her attorney met with the district attorney to negotiate her plea. In exchange for immunity, she had to reveal a secret that had been kept since the morning of December 26. Sandy recounted that on the morning of Dawn's death, Nick contacted her and said, "I did it." However, the conversation was interrupted by another call from the church informing her of Dawn's death. After the call ended, Sandy turned to Nick to clarify what he meant, but Nick simply said, "It's over, it's over." After several weeks, Sandy confronted Nick. At this point, he confessed to his crime. He had overdosed Dawn with Benadryl and then covered her face with a plastic bag to suffocate her. Dawn was still semi-conscious and had to watch as Nick murdered her. After making sure Dawn was dead, Nick arranged the crime scene to make it look like an accidental fire. He placed old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room, underneath Dawn's body, and placed propane tanks near the bed. He also arranged the fireplace to cause a fire in order to erase any evidence of his crime. Dawn's autopsy revealed no soot or carbon monoxide in her lungs or blood. However, this result did not accurately reflect reality because Dawn's red blood cells showed signs of carbon monoxide. The person in charge of Dawn's autopsy concluded that her death was an accidental fire, ignoring important evidence. One reason for this conclusion was that since Dawn was the wife of a pastor, it was thought that Dawn could not have been involved in any adulterous behavior. Although carbon monoxide bound to red blood cells, an autopsy revealed that Dawn did not inhale smoke. However, she had overdosed on the drug Benadryl, 5 times the normal dose. Some believe that this dose was not enough to cause respiratory failure. The pathologist also suggested that even if she had been asleep, Dawn would have reacted to the increased temperatures of the fire. Interestingly, crime scene photos showed newspapers underneath Dawn's body, but this detail was largely overlooked. Nick was finally arrested on September 12, 2001, in the Kinko's parking lot and vehemently denied any involvement in Dawn's death. Nick still faced a first-degree murder charge. His bail was set at $750,000. Sandy's testimony to investigators added to the frustration with the police over the nearly 4-year delay in considering Nick a suspect or making an arrest. Sandy cooperated with investigators because she was angry that Nick had relationships with other women in the church and felt taken advantage of. She believed that God did not approve of their relationship and that therefore Dawn's murder was against God's will. Church members who were questioned described Nick's strange behavior and inappropriate relationships. They also expressed frustration that he did not buy Dawn a tombstone after receiving the life insurance money. On September 17, 2001, Nick appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. He alleged that the church had cursed him and that Pastor Robert was a much more evil influence than the police could understand. Nick's trial then began. Nick was initially charged with first-degree murder, but the charges were amended to aggravated first-degree murder, which carried a sentence of life in prison without parole. Witnesses who testified included women who had relationships with Nick and several church members who had confided in him. They provided information that helped the jury better understand Nick. They had shared details of experiences they believed involved visions and direct messages from God, but in reality, Nick had used these to rationalize and manipulate others. Smith's daughter testified, describing how she had been introduced to Nick through her father, and how Nick had taken advantage of her during her teenage years. The sexual relationship between her and Nick had begun shortly after Dawn had died and continued until she had moved away about a year later. Doctors and forensic experts had also testified, noting that Dawn's body had contained important clues regarding the events of that day. However, these clues had been ignored because Nick had been a pastor. Although there had been no signs of soot or carbon monoxide, which would have been unusual for a living, breathing person in a fire, the defense had vigorously contested these allegations. They had focused their efforts on portraying Nick's ex-partner, Sandy, as a jealous and vengeful man who had fabricated the accusations when he had discovered Nick's affairs with various women. On December 26, 2002, 5 years after Dawn's tragic death, the jury had deliberated for a day before finding Nick guilty of aggravated first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing on February 7, 2003, Nick had addressed Dawn's friends and family, asserting his innocence but expressing remorse for his actions and sharing his sorrow for their loss. Nick had acknowledged that Dawn had deserved better treatment and had been sentenced to life in prison. However, in 2007, an appeal to the state Supreme Court had resulted in a modification of his sentence. The appeal had argued that the original charge of aggravated first-degree murder did not match Dawn's actual cause of death, as she had died from strangulation. The defense had argued that Nick did not deserve a life sentence. Ultimately, the state Supreme Court had ruled in favor of the appeal and commuted Nick's sentence to 26 years. Nick would be eligible for parole in 2025 and might be eligible for early release. Dawn had gone too soon, but not forgotten. She had chosen a life with someone she had trusted, but that had not come true. Sadly, that had led to betrayal and her heartbreaking death. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of the Roman family. Jean-Claude Roman was born on February 11, 1954 in Laas, France, and grew up in Claques, Jura. He received his baccalaureate in 1971. He began his studies at Lycée du Parc in Lyon but dropped out after one semester. He then enrolled in medical school. Florence Cray was born on March 6, 1956. She pursued a medical degree at the University of Lyon, where she met Jean-Claude Roman, a distant cousin of her family. Initially, they didn't have a strong connection and barely spent time together. However, through mutual friends and study sessions, they gradually grew closer. Jean-Claude was attracted to Florence and he made an effort to win her over. In return, Florence considered him an ordinary person, not particularly outstanding. Her ideal partner was someone who combined the typical qualities of a doctor: intelligent, charming, and attractive. After failing her second exam, Florence decided to switch from medicine to pharmacy. Jean-Claude and her friend Luc Ladmiral also supported her decision. The three of them maintained the habit of studying, taking exams and supporting each other for a long time, finally graduating in 1980. Florence and Jean-Claude then married, and 6 years later they welcomed their first daughter, Caroline. 2 years later they had a son, Antoine, after Caroline was born. Florence lived a normal life as a wife and mother, working part-time locally to support her family. Her husband, Jean-Claude Raman, worked for the World Health Organization in Geneva, near their home in France. In late December 1992, Florence was out running errands in Fère, France. Her children, Caroline and Antoine, were at school, and Jean-Claude was at work in Geneva. It was a normal day, with Florence still thinking about their recent Christmas celebrations. While she was out, she met the school principal. They exchanged holiday greetings and began discussing their Christmas experiences. The conversation eventually turned to an incident involving Florence's husband. The principal mentioned that the principal had been demoted due to an affair with a teacher, which led to a school board meeting. Her husband, Jean-Claude, also served on the school board, so the principal wanted to discuss the matter with Jean-Claude, so the principal's secretary tried to find Jean-Claude's contact information in the World Health Organization directory, since Jean-Claude worked there. However, Jean-Claude's name was not found, which the principal found strange. Florence laughed it off, but she was also curious. Florence assured the principal that there must be a good reason why Jean-Claude's name and phone number were not listed, and she promised to raise the matter with Jean-Claude when he got home from work. Jean-Claude and his acquaintances have lost touch. He keeps his professional life private, sharing very little with family and friends. His wife, Florence, believes he is a respected researcher in the medical field, but she knows little about his work, and Florence does not even have his office phone number. If Florence needed to contact him urgently, she would page him, and he would call her back as soon as possible. When friends asked Florence about Jean-Claude's role at the World Health Organization, WHO, she would laugh and admit that she wasn't sure. Sometimes, she would jokingly speculate that he might be a secret spy. In 1992, Florence discovered that the WHO hosted an annual Christmas tree event, where staff members could bring their families to decorate a tree together. What surprised her was that Jean-Claude had never mentioned this event to her. Florence was deeply disturbed by the recent events surrounding her husband. First, the school president revealed that her husband was not listed in the WHO directory, despite his claims of working there. Then, she discovered that a significant family event had taken place at his workplace over a decade ago, which he had never mentioned to her. These discoveries likely weighed heavily on Florence's mind. However, during the holiday season, Florence's brother visited the family and noticed a profound sadness surrounding Florence. As the new year, 1993, began, Florence and Jean-Claude spent time together, going shopping. During their outing, Florence insisted that Jean-Claude buy himself a new suit. On January 5th, Jean-Claude withdrew a total of 2,000 francs from 2 different ATMs. He then gave 500 francs to a homeless person he met before going to a gun store. At the gun store, Jean-Claude purchased tear gas canisters, cartridges, a silencer for a .22 caliber rifle, and a stun wand. Jean-Claude returned home, however, on January 11th at 4 a.m., a frantic call was made to the fire brigade, reporting a fire at the house. Garbage collectors on their early morning rounds discovered the house on fire and immediately alerted the fire brigade. The firefighters rushed to the scene and began extinguishing the flames. While they were working, they noticed someone moving in the upstairs bedroom window, indicating that the person was seeking help. Medical personnel were called, and the person, who was Jean-Claude, was rescued from the burning house. After being rescued, Jean-Claude was found unresponsive and in shock. Paramedics immediately attended to him, and he was taken to the hospital, where he eventually fell into a coma. The fire was quickly extinguished, allowing first responders to enter the premises. A family friend, Dr. Luke Ladmiral, was called to the scene and was met with the devastating sight of the charred remains of Antoine, Caroline, and Florence being carried out on stretchers. When a household fire results in fatalities, the police typically launch an investigation to determine the cause of the fire and rule out any potential criminal activity. In this case, due to the significant loss of a prominent doctor's family, law enforcement authorities began an investigation into the tragic fire at the Roman residence. During the examination of Florence's remains, the medical team found evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of her skull, which raised suspicions and sparked an investigation. Further examination revealed that Florence did not die from the fire, but from the blunt force trauma. The examination of the children also yielded a disturbing discovery. Caroline and Antoine did not die in the fire, but were shot hours before the fire started. This new information indicates that the cause of death occurred before the house caught fire. As a result, the police have opened an investigation into the suspicious deaths of Florence and her children. However, Jean-Claude is in a coma and unable to provide any information, so the police have to look for other leads. Florence's home became a crime scene and police began interviewing relatives, acquaintances, and neighbors to find out what had happened to the family. As part of the investigation, police also contacted Luke Ladmiral, the doctor who witnessed the victims being taken from the scene. Luke had no idea what was going on, and Luke had no clue who the Florence family had enemies when asked by the police. Luke still couldn't think of anyone who might want to harm them. However, Luke was asked to come in for questioning again a few days later. During this questioning, the police asked Luke about the family's relationships and any recent events that might have led to the fire. After a thorough questioning, the police still couldn't find any reason to believe that the family had any enemies or that anything unusual had happened before the fire. The investigation then turned to Jean-Claude, and what they discovered was horrifying. Jean-Claude had never actually worked for the World Health Organization, nor had he ever lectured at the University of Dijon. In fact, he wasn't even a qualified doctor. Luke is initially skeptical, but as he thinks back to his time studying with Jean-Claude, he begins to realize that something is wrong. Luke recalls a specific incident from his second year when Jean-Claude was absent from an exam, and Luke visited Jean-Claude at home and found him unwell, with clammy skin, a pale complexion, and dark circles under his eyes. Jean-Claude confided in Luke that he was battling lymphoma, a cancer that had been under control but worsened by the stress of the exam. Luke promised to keep this a secret, especially from Florence, as Jean-Claude had asked him to. The police were unable to obtain any significant information from Luke, so they decided to wait for the results of the forensic tests on the victims. The police noticed several unusual things about the house. All the doors were locked from the inside, indicating that no one had broken in. At first, the main theory was that the fire was an accident. However, the condition of the bodies made them consider other possibilities. The findings pointed to a more complex and sinister scenario, therefore, it was necessary to interrogate Jean-Claude. Since Jean-Claude had been in a coma for several weeks, the police made him their prime suspect and conducted a full investigation during that time. After verifying with the university, it was found that Jean-Claude had spent 12 years studying, passing his first-year exams but failing those in the second year. Since there were no restrictions on re-enrollment, Jean-Claude kept signing up for the second year, attending classes and studying medical texts for over a decade. What was puzzling was that he never managed to pass the second-year exam. Jean-Claude's uncle went to his parents' house to break the tragic news. When Jean-Claude's uncle entered the house, he found the bodies of Jean-Claude's mother and father dead, both shot with the same gun used to kill Antoine and Caroline. An autopsy confirmed that the gun was the same, and the estimated time of death suggested that the murders were related. The situation becomes even more mysterious after the tragedies become public. The police receive an anonymous call from a woman. She is reluctant to get involved in the investigation but has important information to share. She reveals that she had a romantic relationship with Jean-Claude after meeting him in Paris. She was also told that he was a researcher at the World Health Organization. The woman was misled into believing that Jean-Claude was involved in and funding major research projects. He also presented himself as having a significant position in Geneva's banks, making them seem very attractive. Jean-Claude convinced her to invest in a Swiss bank by offering an unusually high 18% interest rate. The woman eventually agreed to give Jean-Claude 990,000 francs to invest, expecting to receive her returns after 3 months. As the deadline approached in early January, she reminded Jean-Claude of their agreement, stressing that she urgently needed the funds to support herself and her family. After negotiating, Jean-Claude invited the woman to dinner with a well-known politician, which sparked her interest in recovering her investment. On the agreed day, Jean-Claude picked her up in Paris, and they began their journey. However, as night fell, they found themselves lost on the road. Jean-Claude suddenly stopped the car and attacked the woman with tear gas, a stun wand, and a cable in an attempt to subdue her. Despite being caught off guard, the woman fought back fiercely and managed to escape the vehicle. Jean-Claude chased after her but stopped when she begged for mercy. After his plan failed, Jean-Claude begged for forgiveness and used a familiar excuse with the woman, claiming that his lymphoma was acting up, causing his erratic behavior. The woman agreed not to talk about the incident. As the police looked into Jean-Claude, they began to see him as a con man and a manipulator. When Jean-Claude awoke from his coma, he was immediately approached by the police, who wanted him to confess, but Jean-Claude chose to remain silent. With a blank expression, he stared into space, reluctant to speak when the police asked him about the events of January 9th, the fire, the shooting of Antoine and Caroline, Florence's serious injuries, and the discovery of his dead parents. Despite repeated questioning, Jean-Claude revealed nothing. The truth about Jean-Claude's life was finally revealed to the police. That's when he decided to break his silence. The reasons for this sudden change are still unclear, but it marked the beginning of him speaking out. On the evening of January 9th, Jean-Claude and his wife Florence spent a typical night at home. After putting their children to bed, they went to their bedroom. However, Jean-Claude's memories of that night are unclear until he recalls a disturbing scene, finding his wife lying in a pool of blood on their bed, with a bloodied rolling pin in his hand. Confused about what had happened, Jean-Claude claims he didn't remember if an argument had occurred. He then went to sleep beside his wife's body. The next morning, he woke up and prepared breakfast for their children, Caroline and Antoine. He served them cereal and joined them to watch TV. When the children asked about their mother, Jean-Claude told them she was unwell and needed to rest. After breakfast, Jean-Claude urged Caroline to go upstairs to her bedroom. Jean-Claude then took out a .22 caliber rifle, equipped with a silencer, and shot his 7-year-old daughter Caroline in the back of the head, killing her. His son Antoine also met a similar tragic end. After the shootings, Jean-Claude left the house and went about his daily routine, appearing normal to those around him. He bought newspapers and watched television at home. However, Jean-Claude received a phone call from his parents inviting him to lunch, which he accepted. Jean-Claude drove to his parents' home and joined them for lunch. After lunch, Jean-Claude asked his father to go upstairs with him, saying Jean-Claude needed help with a faulty boiler pipe. Jean-Claude's elderly father checked the pipe at Jean-Claude's request. However, Jean-Claude shot his father in the back. He then went downstairs to his mother and shot her. Before leaving, Jean-Claude also shot the family dog. During the trial, when questioned about this, Jean-Claude showed a hint of remorse. Overcome with emotion, he broke down in tears, explaining that the dog was cherished by his children and reminded him of Caroline. This moment led Jean-Claude to decide to return home and take his own life. But his plan did not go as intended. Jean-Claude's former lover gave him 990,000 francs for an investment scheme, which he used to support himself. Jean-Claude told many people, including Florence's relatives and family, about the high returns from his investments, and they trusted him because they knew him. Jean-Claude gradually amassed a large sum of money from those who trusted him. To avoid detection by the tax authorities and others, Jean-Claude transferred the money to accounts in his own name in Geneva. Meanwhile, Jean-Claude managed the family finances, keeping his fraudulent activities a secret from Florence. Eventually, the inevitable happened, and it was time for Jean-Claude to face the consequences of his actions. As expected, those who had invested with Jean-Claude began to demand their money back, along with the promised returns. Despite having amassed over 2 million francs, Jean-Claude spent it all as soon as he had it to cover immediate expenses, leaving Jean-Claude with little to no savings. The inevitable day came when Jean-Claude had to confess the truth to Florence and the others who had entrusted him with money. Jean-Claude could no longer maintain the lie he had created. Feeling trapped and overwhelmed, he believes that ending his family's lives is a way to protect them from the consequences of his fraud. Jean-Claude then plans to commit suicide to avoid facing the reality of his situation. On June 23, 1996, Jean-Claude's trial began. Throughout the trial, Jean-Claude remained largely silent, sitting behind a glass partition with police on either side. On July 2, the court delivered its verdict. Jean-Claude was found guilty of murdering his wife, children, and parents. He was given a life sentence with no chance of parole for 22 years. After serving time in prison, Jean-Claude claimed to have become a devout Christian and expressed remorse for his actions. In 2019, Jean-Claude requested to be released from prison to live in a convent, where he could spend the rest of his life in repentance. The judge agreed to Jean-Claude's request. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Wilma Anderson. Wilma Anderson is the daughter of Linda and Marcus Anderson. Her parents' divorce later left difficulties in the family, making Wilma's living situation unstable. Although she could not live with both parents, her mother was always interested in her life. Wilma lived with her older sister Emily. Wilma is an active and ambitious girl. She likes to share her life on social networks, often posting photos on Facebook. Wilma loves being in front of the camera, showing her creativity and cheerful personality. Wilma met Tishko Ahmed Shabazz in Sweden when she was 15 years old. At that time, Tishko was 20 years old. Because the age of sexual consent in Sweden is 15, their relationship did not cause any legal problems. Although initially apprehensive about the 5-year age gap, Wilma's mother trusted her daughter's decision and eventually accepted Tishko. Tishko was originally from Iraq but moved to Sweden with his family when he was 8 years old. Tishko lived with his father and stepmother. During his school years, Tishko faced bullying, but as he grew older, he developed a strong determination to overcome any challenges he faced. In 2014, Tishko became a Swedish citizen, and after completing his studies in 2018, Tishko found a job in the care industry. Wilma and Tishko moved in together in Uddevalla, Sweden. Over time, Tishko became increasingly controlling, and Wilma's mother noticed a change in her daughter's behavior during the 2 years Wilma lived with Tishko. Wilma often confided in her sister Emily about her difficult relationship with Tishko. On November 14, 2019, Wilma told Emily over the phone that she was ending her relationship with Tishko. She was exhausted by Tishko's control over every aspect of her life, including what she wore, where she went, who she talked to, and how she applied her makeup. Feeling suffocated and desperate to end the relationship, she said she had to pack up and leave before Tishko got home from work. Emily tried to contact Wilma, but her calls went unanswered. The next day, November 15th, Wilma missed her dentist appointment. 2 days later, November 17th, Wilma's parents came to the apartment she shared with Tishko. After several knocks, Tishko opened the door, apparently intoxicated. Wilma's mother, Linda, asked Tishko about Wilma's whereabouts. He admitted that their relationship was over and that Wilma had left after taking her things. Tishko claimed that he did not know where Wilma was. Wilma's parents entered the apartment, hoping to find out more. Tishko recounted the argument that led to the breakup, with him and Wilma having a heated argument when he returned home from work around 5:30 p.m. Initially, her parents were not too concerned, as Tishko and Wilma's relationship was unstable. Emily, extremely concerned about Wilma's disappearance, created a Facebook post seeking information about Wilma. Normally, Wilma always contacted her family, so the lack of contact was very unusual. In the post, Emily described Wilma's appearance as 165 centimeters tall with black hair. After the posts were posted on social media, the police got involved. They interviewed Emily and other family members and began searching for anyone who may have come into contact with Wilma. However, neither Linda nor Emily had heard from her since her disappearance. With an extensive search effort underway, a combined task force of police, friends, and family set out to track Wilma using dogs and drone technology. When police approached Tishko for questioning, he claimed to have no knowledge of Wilma's disappearance or whereabouts, confirming that he had had no recent contact with her. By November 17th, 3 days into the search for Wilma, there were still no leads. Wilma was normally active on social media, but she had been strangely quiet during the time she was missing. As a result, some 5,000 people joined the search effort, and police returned to Tishko to gather more information. However, Tishko insisted that he knew nothing about Wilma's disappearance. Tishko claimed that Wilma had moved on to another man after they broke up, but there was no evidence to support this claim. Wilma's friends and family were left deeply concerned about her disappearance. Meanwhile, Wilma's family shared disturbing details with police about how Wilma's life had changed for the worse since living with Tishko. According to Wilma's family, Tishko controlled Wilma's life. Her sister, Emily, revealed that Wilma confessed that she was abused while living with Tishko. But despite this abuse, Wilma still had strong feelings for Tishko. Tishko took extreme measures to monitor Wilma's activities, including installing a GPS device on her phone. This allowed him to constantly track her location. A series of text messages between the two revealed Tishko's controlling behavior. The police thoroughly investigated Tishko's alibi. He claimed that after arriving home from work at 5 p.m., he did not leave his apartment. To verify Tishko's story, police tracked the GPS on Tishko's phone. Police found CCTV footage showing Tishko at a supermarket around 2:30 p.m. on the day Wilma went missing. He then returned home from work at 5 p.m. Neighbors reported a loud argument between Tishko and Wilma, and arguments were common between them. A loud argument between the Wilma and Tishko occurred around 6 p.m. This prompted a concerned neighbor to check on them. As the neighbor approached the apartment door, they noticed an eerie silence. The sudden quiet was unsettling, but the neighbor, unsure of what to do next, returned to their own apartment. The police thoroughly investigated Tishko's activities, including his workplace and company vehicle. They requested forensic testing on the vehicle and reviewed the GPS data, which revealed his movements from Thursday the 14th to Monday the 18th. According to the GPS log, Tishko had visited clients and returned to his residence during his regular work hours on those days. On the evening of the argument, around 6:30 p.m., Tishko left his apartment. Witnesses saw him walking alone along the freeway, wearing all black clothing. A motorcyclist described Tishko as appearing lost in thought. Police stopped Tishko and escorted him home. When questioned, Tishko said he initially intended to catch a train but decided to walk home instead. However, the police did not file an official report on the incident. Later, on November 19, 2019, Tishko was arrested. He had obvious scratches on his wrists. A search of Tishko's apartment revealed clues such as Wilma's belongings, including a handbag, jacket, shoes, and eyeglasses. Wilma's mother, Linda, insisted that her daughter would always carry her bag, adding to the mystery. Forensic experts tested the scene with Blue Star, a sophisticated version of luminol, and found a trail of blood. Every room had blood on the walls and floors, suggesting a violent struggle had taken place throughout the apartment. The bed had a gruesome stain, a torso-shaped mark that was visible under the glow of Blue Star. The discovery of muscle tissue on a knife and on the living room wall added to the horrific scene. The large amount of blood found made it seem unlikely that anyone could have survived. The search continued outside the apartment, where trash bags were found containing Tishko's bedding with incriminating blood stains. Confronted at the police station, Tishko was shown the evidence against him. However, he strongly denied any involvement, claiming he would have known if someone had been seriously hurt in his home. At the same time, more and more people were joining the search for Wilma every day. The apartment where Wilma was last seen has now been turned into a crime scene, but all attempts to contact Wilma have been unsuccessful. 2 weeks after Wilma went missing, on November 28, police brought in sniffer dogs to assist in the search. These trained dogs are experts at detecting the scent of dead bodies. When they entered the bedroom, one of the dogs quickly indicated that it had found something, a sign that there was likely a dead person or human remains in the area. A strong, unpleasant stench filled the apartment, making the already gloomy atmosphere even more oppressive. The police had searched the place before, but this time they carefully searched the bedroom, paying special attention to the area the dogs had marked. They focused on a wardrobe, which at first glance looked like another piece of furniture. However, inside this ordinary-looking wardrobe was a small travel suitcase. When they opened the suitcase, the police found a large object wrapped in aluminum kitchen foil. When they carefully removed the foil, they witnessed a horrifying sight with blood stains on the foil. Wilma's head had been severed, wrapped, and secured with tape. The travel case, which held the gruesome evidence of Wilma's fate, was sent to the forensic labs in Gothenburg for further analysis. A detailed examination uncovered Tishko's fingerprints. The investigation revealed the shocking conclusion of the case. Although the exact cause of Wilma's death could not be confirmed, investigators found severe injuries to her head and eyes consistent with blunt force trauma. The violent nature of the decapitation made it difficult to assess the full extent of Wilma's head injuries. Wilma's family was devastated by the news of Wilma's tragic fate. Wilma's mother Linda joined the efforts to find the rest of Wilma's body. The family was forced to confront the horrific details of the crime, which were slowly emerging from the evidence found in Tishko's apartment. A harrowing picture began to emerge. Wilma's final moments may have taken place in the living room, where she was brutally attacked, suffering a fatal blow to the head. Swedish police recorded Tishko's denial of involvement in Wilma's murder, in which he maintained his innocence. His statement revealed a distorted perception of love, as he said, "You forget that this is a girl he loved and that he lived his whole life for. If he killed her, he wouldn't be able to keep her head." Despite this, law enforcement gathered enough evidence to charge Tishko, and his trial was scheduled for May 2020. Throughout the trial, Wilma's body remained missing. Tishko showed no signs of remorse or emotion. In court, his defense team tried to argue that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, pointing to his irrational beliefs and claims about Wilma as evidence. However, this defense was unsuccessful. On July 27, 2020, the court delivered its verdict. Tishko, 23, was found guilty of murdering 17-year-old Wilma Anderson and was initially sentenced to life in prison. However, the appeals court later reduced his sentence to 18 years. The sentence was reduced in part due to a lack of concrete evidence surrounding the circumstances of Wilma's death, including the fact that her body was never found. Wilma's funeral was finally held in late 2020, bringing closure to the tragic events, but undoubtedly causing immense grief for her family. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Chris Watts. Shanann and Chris Watts. The two met in 2012 and were both from North Carolina, with Shanann from Aberdeen and Chris from Spring Lake. They got married on November 3, 2012. Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, did not attend the wedding due to their strained relationship with Shanann. Cindy later explained that she didn't get along with Shanann and felt she treated her son poorly. After a year of marriage, Shanann and Chris made a significant decision to buy a new home in Frederick, Colorado. This move marked a new beginning for the couple as they started their life together in their new home. Shanann's lifelong dream of becoming a mother finally came true on December 17, 2013, with the birth of her daughter, Bella. 2 years later, on July 17, 2015, she welcomed her second daughter, Celeste. Those who knew Shanann described her as a kind and compassionate person who radiated love and positivity. She always strived to create the best life for herself and her family. As a mother, Shanann loved her two daughters, Bella and Celeste, more than anything in the world. Shanann was devoted to providing her children with the care and support they needed to thrive. Bella, the older of the two sisters, was a compassionate and caring child who naturally took on a protector role with her younger sister Celeste. From a young age, Bella showed a strong desire to look out for Celeste's well-being. Celeste, on the other hand, was a lively and energetic child who brought joy and laughter to everyone around her. Shanann was active on social media, using it to share videos that showcased her personality in daily life. Her friends and family enjoyed these videos, which often featured her husband Chris and their daughters. In her posts, Shanann frequently expressed her deep love and gratitude for Chris. While Shanann's loved ones admire their happy marriage, they also noticed that Chris tends to be reserved and not easily approachable. However, because Shanann clearly loves him, they respect his presence in Shanann's life. In June 2015, Shanann and Chris Watts faced severe financial difficulties and decided to file for bankruptcy. The couple struggled with a large mortgage, car payments, loans, and medical bills, in addition to a substantial amount of credit card debt. At the time, Chris worked at Anadarko Petroleum, while Shanann was employed at a hospital call center. A year later, in 2016, Shanann began a new career as a consultant for a multi-level marketing company called Lovell, where she sold a nutritional supplement called Thrive, which was delivered through a patch. Her colleagues say Shanann is passionate about her work, with one colleague describing her as having a charisma that makes everyone feel welcome and supported. Although Shanann was happy with her life with Chris and their two daughters, she had always dreamed of having a third child, a baby boy, to complete their family. Her wish was granted in spring 2018, when she discovered she was pregnant for the third time. Elated by the news, Shanann planned a surprise for Chris. She waited for him to return home on May 28. Chris walked into the room, not knowing the surprise that awaited him. When Shanann revealed that she was pregnant with a baby boy. After hearing the news, both Chris and Shanann were overwhelmed with joy. They decided to name their unborn child Nico. During the summer of 2018, while pregnant with Nico, Shanann visits her family in North Carolina. Chris stays behind in Colorado for work. While in North Carolina, Shanann takes her daughters to visit Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie. During the visit, Cindy offers Celeste a snack. Despite knowing that Celeste has a severe nut allergy, Cindy gives Celeste a snack containing peanuts. This incident upsets Shannon, who feels that Cindy has put Celeste's life in danger. Shannon was upset and sent a text message to Chris expressing her frustration. She told him he should call his dad and tell him how he felt about his mom putting their daughter's safety at risk that day. Shannon believed Chris's mom was trying to upset her by taking risks with their child's life. While Shannon was visiting family in North Carolina, she noticed a change in Chris's communication style. He stopped responding to her messages and calls, which left her confused. When she asked him about it, Chris said he was busier at work due to new employees and that everything was fine. Despite his reassurance, Chris's sudden lack of communication concerned Shannon. On July 31st, Chris flew from Colorado to North Carolina to join Shannon and their daughters, Bella and Celeste, for the week. The girls were excited to see their dad, and as soon as Chris stepped off the plane, they ran to him, eager for hugs. Chris picked them up and held them tightly. Chris's behavior toward Shannon was clearly different. He didn't greet her with a kiss, just a nod of acknowledgement. Shannon felt hurt and couldn't understand why Chris would act this way. She opened up to a friend via text message, expressing her concern that Chris had changed. Shannon's texts were filled with sadness and confusion. She told her friend that Chris was ignoring her, and they were barely communicating, even when they were in the same room. Instead of talking face-to-face, they were exchanging messages on their phones. Shannon even sent a picture to her friend, showing her and Chris sitting on separate couches, facing away from each other. In her messages, Shannon revealed her suspicions that Chris might be having an affair. Shannon confided in her friend that Chris had told her he no longer believed they were compatible, which left her heartbroken. Desperate to save their family, she proposed that they seek couples counseling to work through their issues. She was willing to make concessions and put in the effort to repair their relationship. However, Chris refused to consider counseling. Shannon soon realized that Chris was not willing to meet her halfway or make any compromises. Despite her efforts to save their relationship, Shannon came to understand that Chris was not interested in finding common ground or working through their problems together. After returning to Colorado from a trip to North Carolina, Shannon, Chris, and their daughters settled back into their normal routine. However, Shannon's return was short-lived, as she soon left for a business trip to Arizona. While in Arizona, Shannon's friends noticed a change in her behavior. She seemed anxious and upset, rather than her usual happy self. One evening, Shannon opened up to her friends in their hotel room, sharing her concerns. She told them that Chris had expressed doubts about their relationship and refused to attend couples therapy. On August 11th, while Shannon was with her friends in Arizona, she received a notification about a restaurant charge on the credit card account she shared with Chris, which raised her suspicions. She couldn't shake off the feeling that Chris might be seeing someone else. Around 1:48 a.m., Shannon returned home from her business trip. Shannon's close friend Nicole Atkinson drove her home. Footage from their doorbell camera confirmed that Shannon had indeed entered her house on August 13th. However, as the day progressed, Shannon failed to send her usual good morning messages, alarming her friends. A missed OB/GYN appointment scheduled for 9:30 a.m. did little to quell their concerns. However, when Shannon missed another engagement, a 12:30 p.m. business meeting, Nicole's concerns escalated, realizing something was seriously wrong as Shannon was now uncharacteristically incommunicado for the entire day. Nicole had a nagging feeling that something was wrong and decided to drive to Shannon's house. As she approached the house, her anxiety spiked. Shannon's truck was parked in a garage, which was very unusual. Nicole went to Shannon's house and knocked on the front door, hoping Shannon would answer and explain that she was just tired from her flight the day before. But Shannon didn't respond. Nicole contacted Shannon's husband, Chris, to see if he knew where she was. Chris told her not to worry, thinking that Shannon might have taken their daughter to visit a friend. However, this explanation did not make sense. Shannon didn't have any plans to meet up with her friends, and they were starting to get concerned. They told Chris that they were going to report Shannon and their daughters, Bella and Celeste, missing to the police. Chris didn't want to involve the police, but Nicole was worried about her friend and decided to call 911 to report them missing. When the police arrived at Shannon and Chris's house, an officer from the Frederick Police Department spoke with Nicole. The officer's body cam footage showed that Nicole was clearly distraught about her missing friend. As Nicole was explaining everything she knew about Shannon and her daughters, Chris arrived at the house. However, unlike Nicole, he didn't seem particularly worried about their disappearance. During the search of the house, the officer found Shannon's purse, which was surprising since she and her daughters were missing. Inside the purse, the officer discovered medication for Shannon and her 2 daughters, which added to the concern. The discovery of the purse made Nicole even more anxious, but Chris remained calm. The officer also found Shannon's wedding ring, left on the bedside table, which seemed unusual given the circumstances. The officer and Chris then went to a neighbor's house to review footage from their security camera. The camera's angle captured part of the driveway and garage of Shannon and Chris's house, which might provide some clues. Chris can be seen on footage opening the garage door and leaving his home at 5:28 a.m. While reviewing the footage, Chris's behavior changed dramatically, appearing nervous and agitated. His neighbor even commented on Chris's unusual behavior, expressing doubts to the officer about Chris's actions. Chris's reluctance to join the search for his missing wife, Shannon, and their daughters, Bella and Celeste, raised concerns with Shannon's friends. They found it incomprehensible that Chris was not worried about his family's disappearance. As the investigation continued, officers went door to door in the neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen Shannon or anything out of the ordinary. The search for Shannon, Bella, and Celeste intensified the next day, with the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joining the effort. The Boulder Police Department also provided cadaver dogs to aid in the search, both on the property and inside the house. As officers searched the home, one handler observed that the house had a strong smell of cleaning solutions and appeared unusually clean. This sparked suspicion, prompting the officers to take a closer look. The presence of cleaning solutions suggested that someone may have attempted to conceal evidence or erase potential clues. Meanwhile, Chris gave an interview to a news station outside his home. He insisted that he and Shannon had not argued before she went missing, and expressed his wish for his family to return home safely. Chris expressed his longing to be reunited with his family, stating that his house felt incomplete without them. However, his behavior during the interview raised suspicions. Despite his emotional words, Chris appeared detached and unemotional, which puzzled those who knew him. Shannon's friends who watched the interview felt his behavior was inconsistent with his pleas for his family to return, and that only added to their concerns. On August 14, Agent Coder interviewed Chris again. During the conversation, Chris suggested that Shannon may have taken the girls to a friend's house to relax. Meanwhile, the police department had received multiple reports of possible sightings of Shannon and her 2 daughters. Chris was shown various photographs, but he was unable to identify any of the individuals as his missing wife and daughters. Agent Coder also asked Chris about his marriage to Shannon. Chris claimed that he had never been unfaithful to Shannon and, to his knowledge, she had never cheated on him either. During an interview with Agent Coder, Chris exhibited suspicious behavior, frequently touching his neck with his hands. This caught Agent Coder's attention. The lack of updates from the authorities only intensified the family's desperation. After a 3-hour interrogation, Chris was released from the police department, but he was asked to return the following day, August 15, for a polygraph test, to which he agreed. On August 15, Chris picked up his father from the airport and then drove to the Frederick Police Department, where he was scheduled to take a polygraph test. The test was administered by Tammy Lee, a polygraph expert from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. During the test, Chris denied any involvement in his wife Shanann's disappearance and claimed he had no knowledge of her whereabouts. However, his test results showed a score of -8, which was significantly lower than the -4 score needed to pass. This outcome led detectives to believe that Chris was responsible for the deaths of his wife and daughters. Tammy Lee, the polygraph expert, confronted Chris about his failed test results. Chris admitted to causing Shanann emotional pain, but denied physically harming her. He also confessed to having an affair with a coworker and expressed regret for his infidelity. However, he continued to deny any involvement in his family's disappearance. Later in the interview, Chris asked to speak to his father, Ronnie. The officers hesitated, worried that Ronnie's presence might cause Chris to ask for a lawyer. However, they let Ronnie into the interrogation room, hoping that Ronnie's presence might encourage Chris to confess. When Ronnie arrived, Chris told his father that he had killed Shanann, claiming that he did so because Shanann had harmed their daughters, Bella and Celeste. The detectives did not believe for a moment that Shanann had hurt her daughters. Chris eventually confessed to burying Shanann in a shallow grave at one of his work sites and disposing of the bodies of their daughters in oil tanks. Chris pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At his sentencing hearing, the judge stated that Chris's crimes were the most inhumane and brutal he had ever seen.